Hello, and welcome to this reading of Esther Vilar's 1971 book, The Manipulated Man. This is a fun little polemical essay penned by a self-proclaimed feminine feminist, as opposed to a masculine feminist. And she's somewhat of an obscure figure. I believe there's a couple of interviews with her on YouTube, as well as in text. But my info on her is pretty much what I get from the book blurb. On this, it says, Miss Vilar, at the time of writing the book, was 36 years old. She is a Argentinian German. She used to be a sociologist and a doctor before becoming a best-selling author. The book that I hold in my hand has become quite popular among the red pill crowd, which is where I found it personally. And it's become a sort of easily digestible, sort of fun first little red pill, I guess, for guys that are just new to this stuff. The book argues that, contrary to popular belief, contrary to what the feminists would have you believe, the oppressed sex in Western society is not women, but is indeed men. It's written in a quite sort of sympathetic, quite charming, quite funny, quite digestible fashion, and it makes for an interesting sort of quick listen. So I'll just read out to you the dedication of this book, and we can get straight into it. The dedication goes, "This book is dedicated to all those whom it does not mention, to the few who refuse to be manipulated, the few women who are not venal, and to all those fortunate enough to have lost their market value because they are either too old, too ugly, or too ill." And that's about it for the context, so I guess we can just get straight into it. Chapter 1. The Slave's Happiness. The lemon-colored MG skids across the road, and the woman driver brings it to a somewhat uncertain halt. She gets out and finds her front tire flat. Without wasting a moment, she prepares for the repair. She looks towards the passing cars, as if expecting someone. Recognizing this standard international sign of woman in distress, weak female let down by male technology, an estate car draws up. The driver sees what's wrong at a glance and says comfortingly, "Don't worry, we'll fix that in a jiffy." To prove his determination, he asks for her jack. He doesn't ask if she's capable of changing the wheel herself because he knows. She's about 30, smartly dressed, and made up that she is not. Since she cannot find her jack, he fetches his own, together with his remaining tools. 5 minutes later, the job is done, and the punctured wheel stowed away in its appropriate place. His hands are covered with oil. She offers him an embroidered handkerchief, which he politely refuses. He has a rag for such occasions in his toolbox. The woman thanks him profusely, apologizing for her typically feminine awkwardness. She might have even been there till dusk, she says, had he not stopped by. He makes no reply, but as she gets back into the car, gallantly shuts the door for her. Through the wound-down window, he advises her to get a new tire at once, and she promises to get her garage man to see to it that very evening. Then she drives off. As the man collects his tools and goes back to his own car, he wishes he could wash his hands. His shoes, he's been standing in the mud while changing the wheel, are no longer as clean as they should be. He is a sales representative. What's more, he will have to hurry to reach his next customer in time. As he starts the engine, he thinks, women, each as stupid as the other, and seriously wonders what she would have done if he had not been there to help. He puts his foot on the accelerator and drives off, faster than usual. There is the delay to make up for. After a while, he starts to hum quietly to himself. In a way, he's feeling happy. Almost any man would have behaved in the same manner, and so would have most women. Without thinking, simply because man is man and women are so different from them, a woman will make use of a man whenever there is an opportunity. What else could have the woman done when her car broke down? She's been taught to get a man to help. Thanks to his knowledge, he was able to change the wheel quickly and at no cost to herself. True, he ruined his clothes, put his business in jeopardy, and endangered his own life by driving too fast afterwards. Had he found something else wrong with the car, though, he would have mended that too. That is what his knowledge of cars is for. Why should a woman learn to mend punctures when the opposite sex, half the world's population, are able and willing to do it for them. Women let men work for them, think for them, and take on their responsibilities. In fact, they exploit them. Yet, since men are strong, intelligent, and imaginative, while women are weak, unimaginative, and stupid, why isn't it men who exploit women? Could it be that strength, intelligence, and imagination are not prerequisites for power, but merely qualifications for slavery? Could it be that the world is not being ruled by experts, but by beings who are not fit for anything else, by women? And if this is so, how do women manage it so that their victims do not feel themselves cheated and humiliated, but rather believe themselves to be what they are least of all, masters of the universe? How do they, women, manage to instill into men this sense of pride and superiority which inspires them to ever greater achievements? Why are women never unmasked? Chapter 2. What is man? Basically, a man is a human being who works, and who, by working, provides for himself, his wife, and his wife's children. A woman, on the other hand, is a human being who does not work, or at least only intermittently. Most of the time she provides neither for herself, nor for her children, let alone for her husband. Any qualities in a man which a woman might find useful, she chooses to call masculine. All others, which are of no use to her, or to anyone else for that matter, she chooses to call effeminate. A man's appearance has to be masculine if he wants to be successful with women. And that means it'll have to be geared to his one and only raison d'etre, which is work. His appearance must conform to each and every task put to him, and he must always be able to fulfill it. Except at night, when the majority of men wear striped pajamas with a minimum of pockets, men wear a kind of uniform. This is made of lasting, stain-resistant material in brown or grey. The uniforms or suits have up to 10 pockets in which men carry instruments and tools indispensable for their work. Since a woman does not work, her night-or-day clothes rarely contain pockets. On social occasions, men are permitted to wear black, although it is a less practical color, showing as it does marks and stains. However, at such times men are less likely to get them dirty. Moreover, the bright colors worn by women show to advantage against it. The occasional red or green formal clothes worn by men are acceptable though. By contrast, all the real men present seem so much more masculine. The rest of a man's appearance is also adapted to his situation. His hair is kept so that a quarter of an hour's visit to the barber every 2-3 weeks is sufficient to keep it looking tidy. Curls, waves, and tints are not encouraged as they might hinder his work. After all, since he often works in the open air or spends a considerable amount of time in it, complicated styles will only be a nuisance. Anyway, such styles would not necessarily be a success with women, for in contrast to them, they never judge the opposite sex from an aesthetic point of view. So most men, after some attempts at individuality, realize that women are indifferent to their efforts and revert to one of the longer or shorter standard styles. The same is true of beards. Only oversensitive men, usually those with intellectual pretensions, who want to appear mentally tough by letting their facial hair grow indiscriminately, wear a full beard for any length of time. It'll be tolerated by women though, for a beard is an important indication of a man's character and therefore of the way in which he might be most easily exploited. His field of work will usually be that of the neurotic intellectual. Generally, a man uses an electric razor for about 3 minutes every morning to keep his beard in check. For his skin, soap and water are considered good enough. All that is required of his countenance is cleanliness and an absence of makeup, so that everyone can see what he is like. That only leaves his nails. The one important thing about them is that they should be as short as possible for work. Apart from a wedding ring, which is worn to show that he is already being used by a particular woman for a particular purpose, a proper man wears no ornaments. His clumsy, functional watch, worn on the wrist, is hardly decorative. Heavy in design, waterproof, shock-resistant, and including a dial for the date, it cannot possibly be called an ornament. What's more, it's usually been given to him by the woman for whom he works. Shirts, underwear, and socks, for real men, have been reduced to such a basic norm that one man's differs from another's only in size. They can be bought in any shop without difficulty or loss of time. Only in ties is there any degree of freedom. And then a man is usually so unused to making a choice that he lets his women buy them for him. Anyone visiting this earth from another planet would think it a man's object in life to look as much like each other as possible. Yet, to fulfill women's purposes, masculinity and male usefulness vary to a considerable degree, and they have to. For women who hardly ever work, need a man for everything. There are men who carefully maneuver a large limousine out of the garage at 9 o'clock every morning. Others leave an hour earlier, traveling by the standard family car. Still others leave when it's not even yet light, wearing overalls and carrying parcels of sandwiches under their arms to catch buses, tubes, or trains to factories or building sites. By one of these tricks of fate, it's always the latter, the poorest in fact, who are exploited by the least attractive women. For unlike women, who have an eye for money, men only notice women's external appearance. Therefore, the more desirable women within their own class are always being snatched away from under their noses by men who happen to earn more. No matter what work a given man does or how he spends his day, he has one thing in common with every other man. He spends it in a degrading manner, and he himself does not gain by it. It's not his own livelihood that matters, for he would have to struggle far less for that, since luxuries don't mean anything to him anyway. It's the fact that he does it for the sake of others that makes him so tremendously proud. He will undoubtedly have a photograph of his wife and children on his desk and will miss no opportunity to hand it around. No matter what a man's job may be, bookkeeper, doctor, bus driver, or managing director, every moment of his life will be spent as a cog in a huge and pitiless system, a system designed to exploit him to the utmost and until his dying day. It may be interesting to add up figures and make them tally, but surely not year in and year out. How exciting it must be to be able to drive a bus through a busy town, but always the same route, the same time, in the same town, day after day, year after year. What a magnificent feeling of power to know that countless workers move at one's command. But how would one feel if one suddenly realized one was their prisoner and not their master? We've all long ceased to play the games of childhood. Even as children, we soon became bored and changed from one game to another. But a man is like a child who is condemned to play the same game for the rest of his life. The reason is obvious. As soon as he is discovered to have a gift for one thing rather than another, he's made to specialize. We have all long ceased to play the games of childhood. Even as children, we soon became bored and changed from one game to another. But a man is like a child who is condemned to play the same game for the rest of his life. The reason is obvious. As soon as he is discovered to have a gift for one thing rather than another, he's made to specialize. Then, because he can earn more money by working in that field, he's forced to do it forever. If he was good at arithmetic in school, if he had a head for figures, he'll be sentenced to a lifetime of figure work as a bookkeeper, mathematician, or computer operator, for there lies his maximum working potential. Therefore, he will add up figures, press buttons, and add up more figures, but he will never be able to say, "Enough of this, I've had it. Now I'll go do something else." The woman who's exploiting him will not really permit him to look for something else. After a desperate struggle to stave off his competitors, he may, driven by this woman, be able to improve his position and perhaps even make it as the head clerk, or even the manager of his bank. But isn't the price he's paying for his highest salary rather too high? A man who changes his way of life, that is, changes his profession, for life and work are synonymous concepts to him, is considered unreliable. If he does it more than once, he becomes an outcast of society and remains alone. For society is nothing else but women. The fear of being rejected by society must be very considerable. Why else would a doctor who, as a child, liked to observe guppies in a jam jar, consent to spend his life opening up nauseating growths and examining and pronouncing on human excretions? Why else would he concern himself night and day with people of such repulsiveness that everybody else is driven away? Would a pianist who, as a child, liked to tinkle on the piano really enjoy playing the same Chopin piece over and over again for the rest of his life? Would a politician who, when still a schoolboy, happened not only to stumble across the techniques of manipulating people, but managed to use them successfully, really want to go on as an adult, mouthing words and phrases as an unimportant political functionary? Would he want to continue to contort his face and play the fool and listen to all the idiotic chatter of his socially inferior competitors? Surely he too must have dreamed of a different kind of life. And even if he became president of the United States, wouldn't the price still be too high? No, one can hardly assume men do all this for pleasure and without feeling a desire for change. They do it because they've been manipulated into doing it. Their whole life is nothing but a series of conditioned reflexes, a series of animal acts. A man who is no longer able to perform these acts, whose earning capacity is lessened, is considered a failure. Indeed, he stands to lose everything: wife, family, home, his whole purpose in life. All the things, in fact, which give him security. Of course, one might say that a man who has lost his capacity for earning money is automatically freed from his burden and should be glad about this happy ending. But freedom is the last thing that he wants. He functions, as we shall see later, according to the principle of pleasure and non-freedom. To be sentenced to a lifelong freedom is even worse than to be sentenced to a life of slavery. To put it another way, man is always searching for someone or something to enslave him, for only as a slave does he feel safe, and as a rule his choice falls on woman. Who or what is this creature to whom he owes this degraded life, and who, moreover, is exploiting him so that he can only feel safe as her slave and her slave alone? Chapter 3. What is woman? A woman is, as we have already said, in contrast to a man, a human being who does not work. One might in fact leave it at that, for there isn't much more to say about her, if the basic conception of a human being were not too general, too inexact, to embrace both man and woman. Life offers human beings a choice of two possibilities: animal existence, a lower order of life, and spiritual existence. Women will no doubt choose the former and opt for the physical well-being, a breeding place, and the opportunity to indulge her breeding habits without hindrance. It can be taken as a fact that men and women are born with the same intellectual potential and that there is no primary difference in intelligence between the sexes. It's also well known that any potential, if left to stagnate, will atrophy. Women do not use their mental capacity. In fact, they deliberately let it disintegrate. After a few years of sporadic training, they revert to a state of secondary and irreversible stupidity. Why do women not make use of their mental capacity? Women don't bother to use their brains for the simple reason that they don't need to. It's not essential for their survival. In theory, a beautiful woman needs even less intelligence than a chimpanzee, and yet no one would consider her an unfit member of society. By the age of 12 at the latest, most women have decided to become prostitutes. Or, to put it another way, they've planned a future for themselves which consists of choosing a man and letting him do all the work. In return for his support, they are prepared to let him make use of their vagina at certain given moments. The minute a woman has taken this decision, she ceases to develop her mind. She may, of course, go on to obtain various degrees and diplomas. These increase her market value in the eyes of men, for men believe that women who can recite things by heart must also know and understand them. But any real possibility of communication between the sexes ceases at this point. Their paths are divided forever. One of man's fatal mistakes, and one he keeps making over and over again, is his assumption that women are his equal, that is, women are beings of equal mental and emotional capacity. He may observe her, listen to her, judge her feelings by her reactions, but in all this he is judging her only by superficial symptoms, for he is using his own scale of values. He knows what he would say, think, or do in her position. When he looks at his depressing state of affairs, if she does not act in an apparently sensible manner, then he assumes there must be something which prevents women from doing what he himself would have done in her position. This is a natural reaction on man's part, as he considers himself the measure of all things, and rightly so, if humans define themselves as beings capable of abstract thought. When a man sees a woman spending hours cooking, washing dishes, and cleaning, it never occurs to him that such jobs probably make her quite happy, since they are exactly at her mental level. He immediately assumes that his drudgery is preventing her from doing all those things which he himself considers worthwhile and desirable. So he invents automatic dishwashers, vacuum cleaners, and pre-cooked dishes to make her life easier and to put her into a position where she could lead the sort of life he dreams of. But he will be disappointed. Instead of using the time she has gained to take an active interest in history, politics, or astronautics, woman bakes cakes, irons underclothes, and makes ruffles and frills for blouses, or, if she's especially enterprising, covers her bathroom fittings with flower pattern transfers. Men naturally assume, therefore, that such things are essential ingredients to gracious living. This idea must have been instilled by women, as he himself really doesn't mind if his cakes are shop-bought, his underpants not ironed, or his bathroom devoid of flowery patterns. He invents cake mixes to liberate her from drudgery, non-iron clothes and toilet paper holders already covered with flower patterns to make the skull easier to attain. And still women take no interest in serious literature, politics, or the conquest of the universe. For her, this newly found leisure comes just at the right moment. At last she can take an interest in herself. And, of course, since a longing for intellectual achievements is alien to her, she concentrates on her external appearance. Yet even this stage is acceptable to man. He really loves his wife and wants her happiness more than anything in the world. Therefore, he produces non-smear lipstick, waterproof mascara, home perms, non-iron furry blouses, and throwaway panties, always with the same aim in view. In the end, he hopes, this being, whose needs seem to him so much more sensitive, so much more refined, will gain freedom to achieve in her life the ideal state which is his dream, to live the life of a free man. Then he sits back and waits. Finally, as woman does not come to him of her own free will, he tries to tempt her into his world. He offers co-education so that she is accustomed to his way of life from childhood. With all sorts of excuses, he gets her to attend his universities and initiates her into the mysteries of his own discoveries, hoping to awaken her interest in the wonders of life. He gives her access to the very last male strongholds, thereby relinquishing traditions sacred to him, by encouraging her to make use of her right to vote in the hope that she will change the system of government he has managed to think up so laboriously according to her own ideas. Possibly, he even hopes that she will be able to create peace in the world, for in his opinion, women are an influence for peace. In all this, he is so determined and so pig-headed that he even fails to see what a fool he is making of himself, by his own standards, of course. Women are incapable of looking at things from a distance, and as a result, they are completely without any sense of humor. No, woman does not laugh at man. At most, she might get irritated. The old institutions of house and home are not yet so obviously outdated and derelict that she can't justify her relinquishing all intellectual pursuits and her renouncing all claims to better jobs. One does wonder, though, what will happen when housework is still further mechanized, when there are enough good nursery schools nearby, or when, as must occur before long, men discover that children are not an essential. If only man would stop for one moment in his heedless rush towards progress and think about this state of affairs, he would inevitably come to realize that his efforts to give women a sense of mental stimulation have been totally in vain. It is true that woman gets progressively more elegant, more well-groomed, more cultured, but her demands on life will always be material, never intellectual. Has she ever made use of the mental processes he teaches at his universities to develop her own theories? Has she made use of the research institutes he has thrown open to her for any kind of original individual research of her own? Will it never occur to man that woman does not read the wonderful books with which he fills his libraries? And though she may well admire his marvelous works of art in museums, she herself will never create, only copy. Even the plays and films' visual exhortations to woman on her own level to liberate herself are judged only by their entertainment value. They will never be a first step towards revolution. When a man, believing a woman his equal, realizes the futility of her way of life, he naturally tends to think that it must be his fault and that he must be suppressing her. Yet in our time, women have no longer been subjected to the will of men. In fact, quite the contrary. They've been given every opportunity of achieving freedom, and if, after all this time, they have not liberated themselves and thrown off their shackles, we can only arrive at one conclusion, that there are, in fact, none to throw off. It is true that men really love women, but they also despise them. Anyone who gets up in the morning and goes out to conquer new worlds with infrequent success admittedly, because he has to earn a living, is bound to despise someone who simply isn't interested in such pursuits. His contempt may even be one of the main reasons for his efforts to further the mental development of women. He feels ashamed of them and assumes that they too must be ashamed of themselves. So, being a gentleman, he tries to help. Men seem to be quite incapable of realizing that women have absolutely no ambition, no desire for knowledge, and no need to prove themselves. All things which, to him, are a matter of course. They allow men to live in the world apart because they do not want to join them. Why should they? Man's independence means nothing to them because they don't feel dependent. They are not even embarrassed by man's mental superiority since they have no sense of intellectual ambition. There is one great advantage which women have over men. They have a choice. A choice between a life of independence and the life of a stupid, pampered parasite. There are few women who would not select the latter. Men, of course, have no choice. If women really felt oppressed by men, they would hate and fear them as oppressors are always hated and feared. But they don't. If they really felt humiliated by men's mental superiority, they would have used every means they had to change the situation. If women were really tied and shackled, surely by now, at such a favorable moment in history, they would have broken free. In Switzerland, one of the most highly developed countries in the world, where until recently women were not allowed to vote, an inquiry was set up in one of the municipalities to find out whether or not the women wanted to vote. The majority were against it. The men were shattered, for they saw in their unworthy attitude yet another proof of centuries of male oppression. How very wrong they were. The last thing a woman feels is oppressed. On the contrary, one of the many depressing truths in the relationship between the two sexes is the fact that man hardly exists in a woman's world. How can he, therefore, cause her to feel inferior and thus make her feel rebellious? After all, she only depends on him in a material and, as it were, physical way, rather as a tourist depends on an airline, a cafe proprietor on his espresso machine, a car on petrol, a television set on electric currents. There is nothing agonizing about relationships like that. Ibsen, the playwright, who suffered from the same misapprehensions as other men, meant his doll's house to be a kind of manifesto for the freedom of women. The premiere in 1880 certainly shocked men, and they became determined to fight still harder to improve women's position, while the fashion lasted women threw themselves into the struggle for emancipation and delighted in their new masquerade as suffragettes. Sartre made a similarly deep impression on women later on. As proof of how well they understood his philosophy, they let their hair grow down to their waists and donned black pullovers and trousers. Even the teachings of the Chinese communist leader Mao Zedong were a success. The Mao look lasted for a whole season. Chapter 4. The Horizon of a Woman. It doesn't matter what men do to impress women. In their world, men simply don't count. Only another woman is of any importance in her world. Of course, she will always be pleased if a man turns to look at her, and if he is well dressed or even drives an expensive sports car, so much the better. Her pleasure may be compared to that of the shareholder who finds that his stocks have risen. It'll be a matter of complete indifference to a woman if he is attractive or looks intelligent. A shareholder is hardly likely to notice the color of his dividend coupons. But if another woman should turn to look, a rare occurrence, for her own judgment is infinitely more remorseless than that of a man, her day is made. She has achieved the impossible, the recognition, admiration, and love of other women. Yes, only women exist in a woman's world. The women she meets at church, at parent-teacher meetings, or in the supermarket, the women with whom she chats over the garden fence, women at parties or window shopping in the more fashionable streets, though she apparently never seems to notice, these women are the measure of her success or failure. Their standards correspond to those in other women's heads, not in the heads of men. It is their judgment that really counts, not that of the men. A simple word of praise from another woman, and all those clumsy, inadequate male compliments fall by the wayside, for they are just praises out of the mouths of amateurs. Men really have no idea of what a woman's world means. Their fulsome compliments miss all the vital points. Of course, woman wants to please men as well. Don't let us forget, after all, that he provides the material means. But that is much more easily done. Men have been conditioned to react to a certain degree of alienation. They expect women to conform to certain types of sex symbols created by makeup and other standard trappings: long hair, painted lips, tight-fitting sweaters, miniskirts, stockings, high heels, all done in a moment. It's those living works of art which are beyond man's comprehension. Those creatures walking the fashionable streets of Paris, Rome, and New York. The skill of eyeliner and shadow expertly applied, the choice of lipstick and its application, with or without lip brush, in several layers or only in one, the compromise to be achieved between the pros and cons of false eyelashes, the matching of dress, stole or coat with the lighting scheme, all this is an art requiring expert knowledge of which man has no conception. A man lacks any kind of appreciation for this. He has not learned to appreciate the extent of female masquerades, and he cannot possibly evaluate these walking works of art. To achieve perfection, such skills need time, money, and an infinitely limited mind, and these requirements are met only by women. In fact, when a woman dresses, she considers a man only to a slight extent, the extent necessary to hold him and to encourage him to provide, in the widest sense, for her. Every other investment is aimed at other women. Man has importance only as the provider. If a firm wants to get a hold of a specialist in some field, it will flatter and entice him every possible way to join it. Once the contract is signed, his employers can relax. He's tied to them. A woman behaves much the same way with a man. Although she will give him some rope, it'll only be enough to prove how much better his life will be by her side. Once convinced of this, he's quite happy with his contract with her. A woman may, in fact, be compared to a firm in a number of ways. After all, a firm is only an impersonal system aimed at achieving a maximum profit. And what else does a woman do? Without any emotion, love, hate, or malice, she is bound to the man who works for her. Feelings only become involved if he threatens to leave her. After all, her very livelihood is at stake. But this is quite a rational reaction with a rational cause, and it can be rationally dealt with and adjusted to. She can always place another man on the contract. How different is her reaction from those of a man who finds himself in a similar position? He is racked by jealousy, humiliation, feelings of inferiority and self-pity, but she is emotionless. A woman would never feel jealous in such a situation, since the man is only leaving her for another woman and not in order to be free. In her eyes, he does not improve his position in any way. The adventures of a man's love for a new woman is nothing more than a nuisance. She is seeing it all from the angle of the small entrepreneur who loses his best worker to a competitor. As far as women is concerned, the heartache involved is nothing more than a reaction to having let good business go elsewhere. Consequently, it is quite absurd for any man to think his wife is being faithful merely because she does not go off with other men who, in his eyes, are more attractive. Provided he is working hard and is supplying all the things that really matter to her, why should she? A woman's faithfulness has nothing in common with that of a man. Women are, in contrast to men, practically immune to the looks of their partners. Even if she flirts openly with her husband's best friend, it is probably only to annoy his wife, for only her feelings matter, and not those of her husband. If she feels deeply about the man in question, she will never show her emotions in public. In the practice of pluralistic sex, such as wife-swapping, which is taken over from flirtation as a pastime, it is the other women who hold their interest. History is full of anecdotes about men enjoying themselves with more than one woman at a time. But who has heard a similar story of females? A woman would simply be bored to tears if she could only have sex with an exclusive male group. This has always been the case, and it will always remain so. If women reacted to a man's external appearance, every current advertisement campaign would be useless. According to statistics, it is the female sector of the population who spends most money earned from them by men. But manufacturers do not stimulate their sales by advertisements displaying handsome he-men. On the contrary, no matter whether they want to sell inclusive tours, detergents, cars, bedroom suites, or television sets, each advertisement flaunts a beautiful woman. Only very recently have film producers realized that a handsome hero is not essential for the success of a film. Women are quite content with an ugly star. Belmondo, Walter Matthau, or Dustin Hoffman. And naturally, men prefer them. With their sense of physical inferiority due to the fact that they've only very rarely considered themselves beautiful, they find it far easier to identify with such a star. As long as the leading roles are given to beautiful women, women will continue to enjoy those films just as much as those starring Rock Hudson. For in reality, they are only interested in the women in the film. The reason men have remained blind to the facts like these for such a long time is that they've been misled by the criticisms women make of each other. When they hear one woman make derogatory remarks about another, the nose is too big, chest too flat, hips too wide, legs crooked, men, of course, assume that they can't stand each other or that women are not attracted by another woman's beauty. Yet how wrong they are. Any businessman, for example, who spends his life praising his competitors in front of his employees would be thought quite mad. Before long, half his best workers would have moved to the other firm. It's the same game that politicians play. Of course they have to blacken each other, but if Nixon got stranded on a desert island, he would surely prefer the company of a politician like Castro to the much praised man in the street who, after all, elected him. After all, they have very little in common. Given a stable financial position, the majority of women would probably prefer to spend their lives in the company of other women rather than with a man, and not because they are all lesbians. What men call lesbian tendencies probably have very little to do with a woman's sexual drive. It is just that the sexes have so little in common, if indeed anything at all. It's only money which keeps a woman with a man. Women would make ideal living companions for each other. Their feelings and instincts have all been retarded at the same primitive level. For how many women individualists or outsiders are there? It isn't difficult to imagine the paradise they would create together and how exciting their existence would be. Even if the intellectual level was appallingly low, no one would really be worried. Chapter 5. A Creature of Beauty. To someone from outer space, surely men would appear infinitely more worthy of admiration than women, for man has intelligence as well as beauty. Throughout the centuries, man's standard of values must have become sadly confused, otherwise women would have never been called the gentle sex. The mere fact that they are so much less intelligent than men is enough to contradict such a conception, for a stupid person can never be thought gentle or beautiful unless judged on the purely physical level. Yet it is empathetically the fault of men that such an absurd misconception occurred. He muddled his own values, judging both women and animals by the same standards, though he had some justification. Women, after all, can never claim to be Homo sapiens. A man needs a woman because, as we shall see, he needs something to which he may subject himself, but at the same time he must retain his self-respect. This leads him to endow women with qualities which will justify his subjection. As woman has never yet made any attempt to use her wits, he cannot call her intelligent, but he gets close to it by creating the concept of woman's intuition. So, in the absence of any other real qualities, he calls her beautiful. Aesthetic standards must be subjective, and each aesthetic judgment one makes is an act of personal choice. But subjectivity can so easily become an excuse, and man is only too pleased to allow himself to become a slave. A man assumes that as woman adorns herself with the obvious intention of drawing all eyes towards her, she must have some reason for her action. So man finds woman beautiful because she thinks she is beautiful. Indeed, he is very grateful for being allowed to share this opinion. But this feminine claim to beauty is also supported by subterfuge, by a trick. Woman's greatest ideal is a life without work or responsibility, yet who leads such a life but a child? A child with its appealing eyes, its funny little body, with its dimples and its sweet layers of baby fat, its clear, taut skin, that darling miniature of an adult. It is this child that woman imitates, its easy laugh, its helplessness, its need for protection. A child must be cared for it cannot look after itself. And what species does not, by natural instinct, look after its offspring? It must, or it cannot survive. With the aid of skillfully applied cosmetics, designed to preserve the precious baby look, with the aid of helpless appealing babble and exclamations such as ooh and ah and gorgeous to denote astonishment, surprise and admiration, with inane little bursts of conversation, women preserve this baby look for as long as possible so as to make the world continue to believe in the darling, sweet little girl she once was, and she relies on the protective instinct in man to make him take care of her. As with everything a woman undertakes on her own initiative, this whole maneuver is as incredible as it is stupid. It is amazing, in fact, that it succeeds. It would also appear very short-sighted to encourage such an ideal of beauty, for how can any woman hope to maintain it beyond the age of 25? Despite every trick of the cosmetics industry, despite magazine advice against thinking or laughing, both tend to create wrinkles, her actual age will inevitably show throughout in the end. And what on earth is a man to do with a grown-up face when he has been manipulated into considering only helpless, appealing little girls to be creatures of beauty? What is a man to do with a woman when the smooth curves have become flabby tires of flesh, the skin slack and pallid, when her childish tones have grown shrill and her laughter sounds like the neighing of a horse? What is to become of this scarecrow when her face no longer atones for her ceaseless inanities, and when the cries of ooh and ah sound imbecilic? This mummified child will never fire a man's erotic fantasy again. One thinks her power is broken at last, but is it destroyed forever? No, she still manages to get her own way, and for two main reasons. The first is obvious. She now has children, and once again can stimulate a need for protection. As for the second, there simply are not enough young women to go around. It's a fairly safe bet that, given the choice, man would change his grown-up child wife for a younger model, but as the ration between the sexes is roughly equal, not every man can have a younger woman. As he has to have a wife of some sort, he prefers to keep the one he already has. This is easy to prove. Given the choice, a man will always choose a younger woman. Liz Taylor and Marilyn Monroe were passé the moment their wrinkles could no longer be hidden by layers of makeup, and therefore, when a man went to the cinema, he simply bought a ticket for a younger star. Anyone who can afford it does not limit himself solely to buying seats at cinemas. Financiers and show business executives make a habit of turning in their used wives for new models, and, since alimony is fairly good, not even the old wife seems to mind. In fact, she is probably very glad to have made such a good bargain. But this is a luxury for the rich alone. If a poor man decides in a moment of euphoric irresponsibility to change over to a younger woman, he can be sure of losing her pretty quickly. His money will never stretch to 2 wives and 2 sets of children, for the second wife will certainly insist on having offspring as well. And if an attractive young woman has any choice, she will choose a young man every time, providing he is financially secure. This is not, of course, for aesthetic reasons. With any luck, he will be able to provide for her longer. On the other hand, if offered a rich man of 40 years of age, a woman will certainly prefer him to a poor young man of 20. Women certainly know what they want from men and know exactly on which side their bread is buttered. Women are very lucky that most men never consider themselves handsome, even though many possess a distinct type of beauty. Their bodies are smooth, kept trim by hard work. Their shoulders and legs are muscular, their voices melodic, their laughter warm and human, their faces intelligent. One only has to watch them move to appreciate a beauty which, even in a purely animalistic context, puts women in the shade. They are preserved by their way of life, which women is not. She has neglected her body, has let her muscles relax, and when she has reached her 50s, she has become nothing more than a bag of limp human cell tissue. Just compare a man of 50 with a housewife of the same age. Men are not aware of their own beauty, and no one mentions it. There is so much rubbish written and talked about in the charm of women. Even children and animals are considered graceful, adorable, and delightful, but never a man. He may be brave, perhaps, or strong, or even determined, but these are merely compliments to prove his worth to women. They have nothing to do with his physique. It will be difficult to find a description of the male body except in a medical textbook. And outside of these, who would ever dream of going into great detail about the exact shape of his lips, the precise shade of his eyes in a special kind of light? And as for the delicacy of his nipples, or the pleasing shape of his scrotum and his testicles, just imagine a man's amazement and amusement if they were the subject of hymns of praise. Men are not used to having their looks discussed, and grown-up women who are, as a rule, ugly creatures and who therefore have just cause to admire men, quite apart from having enough spare time to do so, rarely ever see them. It is not that a woman is mean or thinks it bad policy. It's because she thinks of him as a machine for the production of material goods. And who regards a machine as an object of beauty? It's something which functions, and men too judge themselves accordingly. Besides, they are far too worn out by their role as providers and by the eternal rat race to think of being objective about their own looks. All this is a pointless discussion anyway, for basically men are not interested in the possibility of their being beautiful. What point would that give to their labors? Women must be the ones who are beautiful, helpless, and adorable. They must be, in fact, lacking a more precise definition, the gentle sex. Chapter 6. The universe is male. Man is a creature of beauty as opposed to woman, because man, unlike woman, has a mind. This means man has a desire for knowledge. He wants to observe the world around him and find out how it functions. Man thinks. He draws conclusions from the data presented to him. Man is creative. As a result of his exceptionally wide, multi-dimensional emotional scale, he's not only capable of registering what is obvious or conventional, but he also discovers and creates new emotional values and makes them generally accessible by means of sensible description, or recreates them as an artist in a visual or audible form. Of all male qualities, his innate curiosity is the most conspicuous among them. This curiosity differs basically from that of a woman, a fact which will be further elucidated. A woman only takes a real interest in a subject when it has personal significance and might be used to serve her own ends. You may see her reading the political columns of a paper, but it is highly unlikely that she takes an acute interest in the fate of the Israelis, South Africans, or Chinese. It's far more likely she has an eye on some student of political science. If you find her looking up the name of a Greek philosopher, there is no need to assume an interest in philosophy. 10 to 1 she will be doing a crossword puzzle. And has one ever known a woman study advertisements for cars from a purely mechanical interest? Of course not. She wants to buy a new one. One of the most amazing facts of life is that women, even mothers, have absolutely no idea how the human species develops, how it grows in their wombs, what phases occur between the moment of conception and the actual birth. Why should they bother to go into all that? They can do nothing about the development of the embryo anyway. It's enough to know that a pregnancy lasts 9 months, that one must not take any risk, and that one should consult a doctor when in need. He can be relied on to put everything right. Man's curiosity is something quite different. His desire for knowledge has no personal implications, is purely objective, and in the long run is much more practical than a woman's. One only has to watch a man go past a building site where new earth-moving equipment is in use. There's hardly a man who will not at least give it a quick glance, while the majority, irrespective of their social status, stop to look and talk. They discuss its characteristics, its precise advantages and its differences from the previous models. A woman would never think of stopping at a building site unless, of course, the crowd was so big that she thought she might miss something exciting. Building site laborer crushed by bulldozer and so on. On such an occasion, she would demand to know all the details and then look the other way. There is virtually nothing which will not arouse a man's curiosity. It could be politics, botany, nuclear physics, or anything else one might name. Even subjects which are really outside his field hold his interest, like bottling fruit, preparing a cake mixture, or caring for a baby. No man could ever be pregnant for 9 months without knowing all about the functions of the placenta and the ovaries at the very least. Men not only observe the world around them, it's also in their nature to make comparisons and apply the knowledge they have gained elsewhere with the ultimate aim of transforming this newfound knowledge into something else, something new. One need not even bother to stress the fact that all inventions and discoveries have always been made by men, and not only in the fields of electricity, aerodynamics, gynecology, cybernetics, mechanics, quantum mechanics, hydraulics, and the theory of descent. Men have extended their research to deal with child psychology. They have worked out the best diet for a baby, as well as the different means of preserving various foods. Even more trivial subjects, such as fashion design, the planning of new kinds of menus, or the composition of dishes to please the gourmet's palate, are products of male creativity. Who would expect to be served an epicure's dish in his own home? It can only be found in a restaurant, where the chef, of course, is male. Women's sense of taste, never very highly developed, becomes even more blunted and deadened by the repetitive preparation of unimaginative, run-of-the-mill, tasteless, everyday cooking. You will never find a female gourmet. Women, in fact, are useless in every sphere. With his many gifts, man would appear to be ideally suited, both mentally and physically, to lead a life which is both fulfilled and free. Yet instead he chooses to become a slave, placing his many discoveries at the service of those who are incapable of creation themselves, at the service of mankind, man's own synonym for women, and of the children of these women. How paradoxical that this very sex which is capable of leading a life as nearly perfect as possible is prepared to give it up, to offer it all to the female sex, who are not interested in such perfection. We have grown so accustomed to the blunted mechanism of one-sided exploitation of one group of human beings by a parasitical clique that all our moral values have become completely perverted. Without really giving the matter any thought, we consider the male race as a kind of Sisyphus. He has come into the world to learn, to work, and to father children. His sons, in their turn, will learn to work and produce children, and so it will continue forever, until it becomes almost impossible to think why else men should be there. If a young man gets married, starts a family, and spends the rest of his life working at a soul-destroying job, he is held up as an example of virtue and responsibility. The other type of man, living only for himself, working only for himself, doing first one thing and then another, simply because he enjoys it and because he only has to keep himself, sleeping where and when he wants, and facing woman when he meets her on equal terms, and not as one of a million slaves, is rejected by society. The free, unshackled man has no place in its midst. How depressing it is to see men, year after year, betraying all that they were born to. New worlds could be discovered, worlds one hardly even dares to dream of, could be opened by the minds, strength, and intelligence of men. Discoveries to make life, their own life, that is, the one women are ignorant of, fuller, richer, and more worthwhile, could be developed. All these things could be done by men. Instead, they forsake all these tremendous potentials and permit their minds and their bodies to be shunted onto signings to serve the repulsively primitive needs of women. Man has the key to every mystery of the universe in his hand, but he ignores it. He lowers himself to the level of woman and insinuates himself into her favor. With his mind, his strength, and his imagination, all intended for the creation of new worlds, he opts instead for the preservation and improvement of the old. And if he happens to invent something new, he needs to prefix it with the excuse that it will one day be useful to all mankind, i.e. to women. He apologizes for his achievements, for conquering space and flying to the moon, instead of concentrating on making life still more comfortable for the women and their children. The hardest thing to do was not to make the fantastic journey into space, but to translate it into female language with TV advertising spots composed of children's prattle and sweet love talk in which women are wooed by men to consume yet more. Man is begging woman to be patient with him and his discoveries. Women have so obviously proved unimaginative that they have no need for any new inventions. If they had, they would invent something themselves, even if only once. We are so accustomed to the idea that man's work is only done with a woman in view that anything else seems unthinkable. Why don't composers create something apart from love songs, which are songs of dependence? Why don't writers give up their eternal romantic novels and love poems and try to create literary works of art? Can paintings only produce nudes and profiles of women, abstract or realist? Why can't we have something new after all this time, something we have never seen before? It really should be possible for scientists to forget dedicating their works to their wives. Anyway, they will never be able to understand them. When will the time come when experimental films no longer have to be weighed down by sexy female bodies? When new reports on space travel no longer have to be tricked out with large snapshots of astronauts' wives? Even the astronauts themselves might stop having love songs played to them during their interplanetary travels. We have absolutely no idea what the world would be like if men really used their intelligence and imagination instead of wasting it. For the invention of pressure cookers, which boil still more quickly, wall-to-wall carpeting, which is still more stain-resistant, detergents which wash whiter, and lipsticks which are yet more water-resistant, is a waste of time. Instead of producing children who will in turn produce children, thus pushing life still further out of their own reach, they should try living for themselves. Instead of probing the depth of a woman's mysterious psyche, mysterious only because there is nothing behind it, they should study their own psyche, perhaps even that of the creatures possibly inhabiting other planets, and think out new ways and means of establishing contact with them. Instead of inventing ever more deadly weapons to fight wars which are only destined to defend private property, i.e. women's property, they should be developing even more efficient methods of space travel which would tell us more about worlds we never dreamed of. Unfortunately, men who are capable and willing to work and think in every other field of research have declared everything concerning women taboo. What is worse is that this taboo has always been so effective that it is no longer recognized as such. Women's wars, women's children, women's towns, all these are made by men. Women just sit back, getting lazier and more stupid all the time, becoming more demanding of material things, and at the same time, much richer. A primitive but effective system of insurance policies for marriage, divorce, inheritance, widowhood, old age, and life, ensure this increasing wealth. It's a well-known fact that in the United States, half of the total private capital is in the hands of women. Yet the number of working women has constantly decreased over the last decades. The situation is unlikely to be any different in industrial Europe. At this time, women already have complete psychological control over men. It won't be long before they have material control as well. Men seem to be quite unaware of these facts and go on finding happiness in their own subjugation. There could be only justification in their attitude if women really were the charming, gracious creatures men believe them to be. Fairy princesses, angels from another world, too good both for men themselves and for this earthly existence. It's quite incredible that men whose desire for knowledge is unbounded in every other field are actually totally blind to these facts, that they are incapable of seeing women as they really are, with nothing else to offer but a vagina, 2 breasts, and some punch cards programmed with idle, stereotyped chatter. That they are nothing more than conglomerations of matter, lumps of stuffed human skin, pretending to be thinking human beings. If men would only stop for a moment in their headlong creativity and think, they could easily tear the masks off these creatures with their tinkling bracelets, frilly blouses, and gold leather sandals. Surely it will only take them a couple of days, considering their own intelligence, imagination, and determination, to construct and artifact a kind of human female robot to take the place of woman. For there is nothing original in her, neither inside nor out, which could not be replaced. Why are men too afraid to face the truth? Chapter 7. Woman. divine by right of stupidity. Only the oppressed have any real need for freedom. Yet as soon as they are free, and providing they have the intelligence to weigh their freedom against the possible consequences, this need changes. The former longing for freedom reverts to a sense of fear, accompanied by an intense longing to be tied and secure. In the first years of life, man is never free. He is hemmed in by adult rules, and having no experience of social conduct to guide him, he is entirely dependent on them. As a result, he develops an acute desire for freedom and feels a desperate need to escape from his prison at the first opportunity. But once a human being is free, he will, if he happens to be stupid as well, and women are stupid, be quite happy with his freedom and try to retain it. As the unintelligent human being is incapable of abstract thought, he will never feel the need to leave his familiar terrain and consequently will never fear that his very existence might be threatened. He's not afraid of death because he cannot imagine it. There isn't even a need to find a meaning or a reason in life. His desires are fulfilled in his own personal comforts, and these provide reason enough for living. Even the need for religion is comparatively unknown to a person of low intelligence, and if it does arise, it is very easily satisfied. Anyone who is stupid has an infinite capacity for self-adoration. If a woman decides to believe in God, then it is for one reason only. She wants to go to heaven. And what, after all, is the dear Lord but yet another man who will easily arrange it for her? How different is the situation of the intelligent human being, a man. True, at first he welcomes his newfound freedom with a sense of relief, drunk with the vision and perspective of life before him. But as soon as he has to put this freedom to the test, that is, as soon as he wants to commit this or that act which might send him in this or that direction, he gets scared. As he is capable of abstract thinking, he knows that on every one of his acts depends a possible series of consequences, not all of which can be predicted. If he decides to act of his own free will, then the responsibility will also be his and his alone. At such a moment, man will be only too glad to halt all action forever, but because he is a man, and it's a man's destiny to act, he begins to long for the rules of his childhood, to long for someone who will tell him what to do, to give meaning to his now meaningless actions. These actions are meaningless because they serve his comfort, but which does he serve? At this point, he will start to search for a new deity, a god resembling his mother, the god of his childhood, and the moment he finds her, he becomes her abject slave. If given the choice, man would, of course, prefer a strong god, just, wise, and omniscient, rather like the god of Christianity, the Jews, and the Muslims. But, as he is an intelligent being, he knows that such a divinity cannot exist, that every adult is, by definition, his own personal god, who must make his own rules. So he sets out to make up such rules, such gods. When man creates rules of this nature, he unconsciously compares notes with other men, offering his own experiences and checking them against those of others. He discovers similarities and, without conscious effort, makes general rules from the experiences held in common. These rules then become laws, determining future reasonable, i.e. for anyone except for himself, useful behavior, and he subjects himself to them. The systems created by this gradually become collectively and individually more and more generally applicable, and the amendments made grow so complicated that no single person can take them all in. With time they become autonomous, and men regard them as divine. All one can do is to trust in them as a child trusts the dictates of a parent. Nor can they be changed, for any attempt at trespassing against them might mean being cast out of the community and loss of security. Marxism, charity, racialism, and nationalism all evolved in this way. Therefore, a man whose personal need for religion is satisfied by such a system will be more or less safe from the control of one single other person, woman. Most men, however, prefer to have an exclusive goddess. They become her slave and call their subjection love with a capital L. A personal deity of this kind also offers the best opportunities when it comes to satisfying the need for religion. A woman is always there for a man and is truly divine, since she herself has no need for religion. Man will never feel forsaken by his personal deity. A goddess is omnipresent. She even gives him freedom from collective gods for whose favors he would have to compete with others. He trusts her because she is like his mother, the faithful deity of his childhood. His otherwise meaningless life is given an artificial sense of purpose, for every action is dedicated to her comfort and, later, to the comfort of her children. In every way she will be divine, for not only can she punish man by taking away his sense of belonging, but she can reward him as well. She grants him sexual pleasure. Woman's greatest pretensions to divinity, however, lie in her stupidity and in her passion for creating a protective mask. There are two choices open to a system which wishes to become divine. It may impress its disciplines upon its followers by its greatly superior wisdom, or it may bewilder them by its incomprehensibility. The first possibility is, of course, out of the question for women, but they take great advantage of the second. Their pose is but a mask, designed to make men think them strange, mysterious creatures who elude all attempts at assessment or control. For whereas intelligence shows in actions that are reasonable and logical, and can therefore be measured, predicted, and controlled, stupid actions are completely unreasonable, cannot be predicted, and cannot be controlled. Consequently, women are as much protected by the ramparts of pomp, mummery, and mystification as any pope or dictator. They can't be unmasked and will increase their power unhindered, gaining strength all the way. In return, man is guaranteed, in the long run, a divinity in which he can truly believe. Chapter 8. Breaking In. Man is trained to fulfill his duties as the slave of a woman from his earliest years. Indeed, he cannot be too young, for his craving for the enslavement might well lead him to subject himself to other men, an animal perhaps, or even a social system. Therefore, she has managed to build into his life a series of animal acts to train him, and this breaking in begins at a very tender age. It's fortunate for her that the young male child is so much under woman's jurisdiction and consequently is so very easily controlled by her. And by the natural process of selection, the very women who are most interested in training a man are the ones who reproduce themselves. The others are incapable of reproducing themselves anyway. The mere fact that a man is accustomed to the presence of a woman from his earliest years on, to finding her presence normal and her absence abnormal, tends to make him dependent on her in later life. But this sort of dependence would not be too serious, for life without a woman would mean nothing more than a change of environment. In the same way someone born in the mountains might go and live in the plains, although he might well think of his mountain home with nostalgic longing, he is very unlikely to go back. Other things have become more important in his life. It would also not be in the best interests of women if all men felt when away was a romantically vague sense of nostalgia to be experienced only on Sundays from afar, and which has no direct consequences. She takes great care that man is directly trained for a particular purpose. He has to work and put the fruits of his labor to her disposal. Woman has had this aim in view throughout the upbringing of her child, and she engenders in him a series of conditioned reflexes which are based entirely on her own scale of values. She does this by manipulating him for the first year of life. Consequently, by the time his education is complete, man will judge his own value by woman's sense of his usefulness. He will only be happy when he has won her praise and produced something of value for her. One might well say that woman becomes a kind of chart. At any given moment, man can refer back to his and judge the value or the futility of his actions. If he spends any time on something which has no value in terms of his chart, football for example, he will do this as best to compensate for the minus point as quickly as possible by increasing his activity on the plus side of the scale, which explains why women have nothing much against football or other types of spectator sports. One of the most useful factors in conditioning of a man is praise. Its effect is better and much more lasting than, say, sex, as it may be continued throughout the whole of a man's life. Not only that, praise is applied in the correct dosage, a woman will never need to scold. Any man who is accustomed to a conditional dosage of praise will feel its lack a displeasure. There are other advantages to the correct application of praise. It will make the praised person into an addict. Praise is only valuable if it comes from a superior source, and the praised person will therefore look upon their praiser as a kind of superior being. It has become a drug, for without praise, a man will quickly lose all ability of judging his own value or of retaining his sense of identity. It is an incentive to work, for praise should never be dealt out for the same degree of achievement, only for an increased degree. The moment a male child has been rewarded by a warm smile and by the customary inane kind of encouraging adult baby talk for using his pot and not wetting his bed, or for drinking the last drop from his bottle, he's caught up in a vicious circle. He will repeat the actions which call forth praise and endearments, and if at any time recognition is not granted, he will do everything in his own power to regain it. The happiness he will feel when praise is restored will already have assumed the proportions of an addiction. During the first 2 years of life, the woman makes no difference between boys and girls. The female infant is submitted to the same form of manipulation until the principles of hygiene are absorbed. But from that moment on, the education of the two sexes follows very different paths. The older the girl grows, the more highly conditioned she becomes in the art of exploiting others, while a boy is increasingly being manipulated into becoming the object of exploitation. Toys play an important part in this early manipulation. The mother will first stimulate the playfulness of her children, and then she will exploit it. The girl child will be given dolls with all the necessary extras: prams, dolls' beds, and toy tea sets. The boy will be given everything a girl never has: Meccano sets, model railways, miniature racetracks, and aeroplanes. Thus, she will be conditioned right from the start to identify with her mother, to fit herself into the role of woman. Dolls are praised or scolded as mother praises and scolds. It's child's play to her to absorb the principles of leadership, and since a girl's education is based on praise, which is, however, meted out when she identifies with the female role, she will never want to be anything but feminine. The standard set will inevitably and forever be woman's, since only women can judge women's role. Men are taught to believe women's role is inferior, and therefore they can never be used as a panegyrist. A male child, on the other hand, is praised for everything he does, as long as he steers clear of games with miniature humans. He builds model dams, bridges, and canals, takes toy cars apart to see how they work, shoots toy pistols, and practices miniature all the things he will need later in life, when he is providing for a woman. By the time he reaches school age, the average boy is already well versed in the basic principles of mechanics, biology, and electrical engineering, all learned by personal experience. He can build wooden huts and defend them in the make-believe wars. The more initiative he shows, the more he will be praised. Woman wants him to develop to the point where he knows more than she does. His knowledge must be superior to hers in everything concerning work, for woman cannot survive without a man. For woman, man is really just a machine, if rather an unusual one, a sort of robot of the kind men are trying to create. Her ideal, provided she can recognize it, would be a robot capable of thought, of programming itself, of continuing to develop and to produce an ideal set of functions to meet each new situation. Scientists, too, are working on the development of such robots who will work for them, make their decisions for them, think for them, and will put the results of their labor at their disposal. But such robots will be constructed from non-living matter. Long before man is in a position to choose his own way of life, he will have formed the necessary addiction for praise. He will only be happy when his work brings him praise, and because he is an addict, his need will increase, and with it, the type of achievement so much praised by his woman. This male need could, of course, be satisfied by another man, but as each man is working feverishly in the interest of his own addiction, he has no time to help others. Indeed, men exist, as it were, in a state of constant antagonistic competition with other men. This is one of the reasons why he loses no time in getting his very own private panegyrist, one whose praise will be his exclusive right, someone who will be at home, always there, waiting to tell him when he has been good and just how good he has been. Quite by chance, woman is apparently best suited to this role. No wonder, since she laid the foundations for it and has only been waiting to take over. It's rare for a man, For a successful artist or scientist, for instance, to be able to conquer his addiction to the extent that he is satisfied by another man's praise. Even if he does, it is really only women he has managed to escape, never the craving itself. Once a particular field of work has brought a man success and financial security, it is rare for him to test his abilities in another sphere, this satisfying his curiosity. His supply of praise might be dangerously reduced. Like Myro with his dots and lines technique, Joanne Strauss with his waltzes, and Tennessee Williams with his plays about women, he will stick firmly to his successful technique. The risk of attempting to be his own measure of success is too great for him to take. One is even tempted to think that there can be nothing very positive about an artist's so-called personal style. For 20 years he has produced a series of Godot replicas, and surely not for the pleasure. After all, he is an intelligent man. He avoids risk, however, as the alcoholic avoids a cure. Yet, if only he could free himself from his conditioned behavior, he would probably do something quite different. Perhaps he might design planes. The reliable construction of his plays hints at a scientific nature. Or grow rare plants. He might even, perhaps just once, write a comedy. Surely so much success is bound to drive away the depths of despair. Comedy, perhaps, about a woman, one up to her waist in a mound of earth, looking for a toothbrush, as in Happy Days. It might even turn out to be a success with the public. But no, the risk is too great for our carefully manipulated man. Better go on writing plays about the absurdity of the vital instinct. At least then he can be certain of praise. Chapter 9. Manipulation by means of self-abasement. A critical man might well say that women have no self-respect. If they had, they would never admit their incredible degree of ignorance as happily as they do. How easily man forgets that his own standards of honor, pride, and dignity are all instilled in him by women, and that the very masculinity which he is so proud of is but a sign of successful manipulation. No credit goes to him at all. Any psychology textbook will tell us that a child's ability to achieve something will be best enhanced by giving it self-confidence. It is not something he will acquire by himself. He is born into a society which is in every way his superior, a society in which he can achieve nothing by his own efforts. So, as a woman's first interest lies in creating an adult capable not only of providing for himself, but for others as well, it is of utmost importance to aim at giving this boy confidence in himself. She starts by minimizing the dangers of life, as far as she herself is aware of them. She conceals the possibility of death, or promises him eternal life as a reward for being good. Good, that is, by her standards. To the best of her ability, she gives him a sense of imbecile optimism which will best prepare him for her manipulation, and for life in general. As we've already seen, praise is one of the best ways of inducing self-confidence, and of pushing up the rate of activity. There is another method which is as effective: self-abasement on the part of a woman. If a woman were not superior to her child, at least in the early stages of his development, the human race would cease to exist. A good mother will take the greatest care, however, never to let this fact impede her child's development. She does not want to turn the tables on herself and keep the boy tied to her apron strings for longer than necessary. As soon as possible, she will try to give a male child a sense of superiority towards herself, a kind of advance against achievements to come. This gives him his first experience of confidence. She may even go one step further and deliberately pretend to be more stupid than she is, giving him a start he must never lose. This, of course, is providing he grows up to be a proper man, and she will take care of that. As the value of woman in society is not measured by intelligence, but by completely different standards, in fact, there are no standards, man needs her, and that is enough. She could pretend to be, or in fact, be as stupid as the occasion warrants. In this way, women have a lot in common with the wealthy. Who cares if they're intelligent or not, as long as they're rich? Henry Ford II would still be socially acceptable if his intelligence was no more than that of one of Tiffany's regular lady customers. It is his chauffeur who cannot afford to be stupid. The rich, like women, can afford every weakness. They, like women, are allowed to leave themselves wide open, and we can justly say that they manage to expose themselves, but never to their disadvantage. In other words, woman can be just as stupid as she likes. A man will still look up to her and will not want to forego her company. The formula for this female conspiracy cannot be more simple. It is masculine to work, feminine to do nothing. And men are so lucky to be men. They're strong and free, while women, weak as they are tied to the home by the burden of bearing children. They are simply not made for any useful kind of work. Men are so willing to believe this myth that they are even flattered by it. It never occurs to them to think that an elephant is strong too, stronger than a man, for example. Yet men are better suited to do most jobs despite the elephant's strength. Women, of course, will never tell men that in comparison, they do nothing in fact, although they do find little tasks to give the appearance of being constantly busy doing something. A woman simply tells her husband that her work is of no value compared with his. She implies that all the inane, pointless pleasures she indulges in, such as ironing, baking, making the house beautiful, all those little jobs which occupy her day, are necessary for the family's comfort. He should think himself lucky to have a wife who is prepared to put up with these menial tasks for his sake. And since men are completely unaware that women really enjoy such jobs, they do think themselves lucky. Thanks to women, everything is labeled masculine or effeminate, worthy or unworthy. By imbuing all they do with so many sentimental and emotional values so that no one can remain unaffected by them, women have created for themselves a state of perfect fool's freedom. Whatever they do is pointless compared with male achievements. And since they say so themselves, who are men to quibble? Of course, if men really wanted, they could destroy this tissue of lies and replace the term masculine and effeminate with hard and easy. For most work done by men is hard, whereas housework is always easy. Men have invented so many labor-saving devices that the housework for a household of 4 persons is easily completed in 2 hours each morning. Anything else a woman chooses to do with her time is merely for her own pleasure, even the maintenance of those inane status symbols considered necessary by her set. Lace curtains, flower beds, brilliant polish. Any woman who maintains that this is work is telling a barefaced, though necessary, lie. Housework is so easy that in psychiatric clinics, it is traditionally the job of morons who are unfit to do any other kind of work. Women may well complain that they do not get paid extra wages and that, after all, they only demand something like the wage of a skilled motor mechanic. All this in itself merely goes to prove how much they enjoy the work. Anyway, women who demand such payments are being very short-sighted, for one day they may really be considered as working power, and be paid accordingly. This, of course, would merely serve to reveal the extent to which they live, at man's expense, beyond their means. Still, man has been accustomed to female terminology since childhood, and he has no desire to disprove it. He needs the feeling of doing something great when he supports a woman, and he needs to feel a woman could not do this work. Without this conviction, the monotony of his life would drive him insane. He only has to get the impression that women can do his job as well as he, and as a result, he will increase his own efforts at once. From time to time, as she sees fit, a woman might well wish to create this impression, and so the customary distance between himself and the weaker sex is maintained, and his self-confidence restored. It is simple to analyze this vicious circle. Women invent rules, manipulate men to obey them, and so dominate the male sex. Of course, these rules in no way apply to women themselves. The male sense of honor, for example, is a system invented by women who loudly exempt themselves from it. They renounce the concept of honor and, as a result, manipulate men. In a recent television series called The Avengers, there was a scene in which 2 antagonists were facing each other across a billiard table, a pistol in front of each of them. It was agreed that to give them each an equal chance, they should count aloud up to 3 and then shoot. The hero, however, grasped his pistol and fired at the count of 2, thus saving his own life. He chose to remain outside the system and was therefore in a position to manipulate the other who, although in a mortal danger, preferred to stick to a system approved by society rather than to use his own judgment. By making her own work appear degrading and contemptible, woman brings man to the point where he will undertake all the other tasks. In other words, everything she does not like doing. After all, she was there first as his mother, so she had first choice. A man loses his self-respect and feels useless if he has to do women's work. In fact, many of them are deliberately clumsy at housework, and women love them for it. Such clumsiness is so adorably masculine. If he is capable of sewing on his own button, and does so, he really is not a proper man at all, and there must be something wrong with him if he pushes the vacuum cleaner around the house. Such beliefs enable man to place himself under the guardianship of women. He trusts himself to accomplish almost anything except to make a decent stew, and so he allows himself to be driven away from the most unexacting place of work in the world without demur or complaint. Only after a certain amount of manipulation, and when there is no longer any danger, can he be permitted to lend a helping hand in the house. Even then, woman always gives strict orders because he really does not understand about such things. He will always feel vaguely humiliated by a job of this nature, and therefore never stop to notice how much more agreeable it is than his own. To be free from the need to make any effort, woman only has to heave a deep sigh and indicate that she, as a woman, is simply not capable of doing it. If she merely hints to a man, preferably with witnesses present, that he drives so much better than she does, well, she has found herself a driver for life. Look at the motorways. They are all full of women being driven by their husband drivers. A woman will say she cannot possibly, as a woman, go into a cafe or a theater or a restaurant by herself. There is no rational reason for this. Women are served equally well or badly, no matter if alone or accompanied by a man. And if she doesn't want to be accosted, why does she dress up to make herself so conspicuous? No, instead she will get herself a flunky. He will drive her to the entrance as if she were royalty, fight for a table, order her dinner, entertain her, and finally pay the bill. Listen to a woman admit she cannot understand politics. It is much too difficult for her. There will be a man ready to plow through the newspapers, study political journals, listen to protracted television discussions, sift other men's theories, and behold, when the time comes to vote, he presents her with an opinion. So, armed with his conclusions as to what is best for his, and thus also her, position in life, off she goes to register his choice. In that way, the final result is not in jeopardy. The alternative might mean the end of her personal well-being. Although she might not understand what politics are about, she is shrewd enough to realize this. One of the most fantastic results of this self-abasement policy is the life of a well-to-do woman today, living as she does in comfort in some pleasantly situated suburban villa, surrounded by children, dogs, other women, by every possible kind of labor-saving device, equipped with television set and second car. She will tell her husband, possibly a lawyer or engineer, what a lucky man he is, what a fulfilled life he leads, while she, as a woman, has to toil and slave at home. That she can even say that to the man who pays for all the junk all his life is in itself incredible. But the fact that he believes her is beyond belief. If we look in the Bible, we learn Eve was created from Adam's rib. She is a copy, therefore, a species of a lower order. Yet another example of manipulation through self-abasement. Can anyone doubt that at some stage in history this story was invented by a woman? She herself did not write it down. A man must have done it for her, since her ability to write is comparatively a recent skill. Chapter 10. A Dictionary. Constant self-abasement in the presence of men has led women to develop a secret language which other women understand, but to which men have no access, since they can take it literally. It would therefore be of great advantage to men to hold the key to this code and so create a sort of dictionary for themselves. Then, whenever they hear a standard phrase, they could refer to it, and the real meaning would become clear. Here are a few examples with a translation into male language. So the following bit is split into two columns. One says coded, the other one says decoded. There's quite a few of these, so let's go. Coded. A man must be able to protect me. Decoded. A man must be able to protect me from all forms of discomfort. What else could he protect her from? Robbers? An atom bomb? Coded. I need a man to make me feel secure. Decoded. Above all else, he must keep his money worries to himself. Coded. I must be able to look up to a man. Decoded. To be at all possible, he must be more intelligent, responsible, courageous, industrious, and much stronger than I am. Otherwise, what on earth could I do with him? Coded. Of course I would give up my profession if my husband asked me. Decoded. Once he is earning enough money, I am never going to work again. Coded. The only thing I want in life is to make him happy. Decoded. I will do everything in my power to stop him seeing how much I exploit him. Coded. I would never bother him with trivial problems. Decoded. I'll do anything rather than to keep him away from his work. Coded. I am there for him alone. Decoded. No other man will be allowed to work for me. Coded. In future I shall devote my life to my family. Decoded. I'm not going to lift another finger for the rest of my life. It's his turn now. Coded. I don't believe in women's liberation. Decoded. I'm not such a fool. I'd rather let a man do the work for me. Coded. After all, we are living in an age of equality. Decoded. Woe to him if he thinks he can order me about just because he earns my money. Coded. I'm so bad at doing things like that. Decoded. That's a job he will have to do. What's he there for anyway? Coded. He knows absolutely everything. Decoded. He is even useful as an encyclopedia. Coded. If a couple really love each other, there is no need to get married at once. Decoded. He is being a bit obstinate, but I'll soon get around to him in bed. Coded. I love him. Decoded. He is an excellent workhorse. Of course, women only use stock phrases like these when there is a man around to hear them. In the company of other women, they talk all about their men quite normally, if indeed at all. They speak of them much as they would speak of some domestic appliance which everyone knows to be practical anyway. If a woman says, I've decided to give up wearing this coat or that hat because my boyfriend doesn't like it, there is bound to be no feeling involved about the man in question. At the most, it'll be about the coat or hat. What it really means is, I might as well do him that favor. He's doing everything I want to anyway. When women are among themselves and are talking about the reasons for opting for any special kind of man, they would never declare that they want someone to look up to, someone who will protect them. Such twaddle would be greeted with the laughter it deserves. They are much more likely to say they want a man with such and such a job. Jobs are synonymous with income level, old age pensions, widows' endowments, and with the capacity to afford high life insurance premiums. Or a woman might well say, the man I'm going to marry must be a little bit older than I am, at least half, a head taller, and more intelligent. By this she means that it is much less conspicuous and appears far more normal for a somewhat older, stronger, more intelligent human being to provide for a younger, weaker, and more stupid one. Chapter 11. Woman, a creature who lacks emotion. Woman has a great many ways and means of manipulating a man, but to recite them all here would take too long. Let it suffice to look at a little more closely at two relatively harmless methods: good manners in man, and that which ultimately leads to the suppression of his emotions. Any man who wishes to be a success with women, and is there one who doesn't, must acquire a variety of qualifications. Apart from intelligence, ambition, industry, and staying power, he must know exactly how to behave in the presence of women. With this aim in view, women have developed certain norms which are called good manners. Basically, the rule is that any man who has a sense of self-respect must, at all times, treat a woman like a queen. Similarly, a self-respecting woman must, at all times, give man every opportunity of treating her like a queen. A woman will, of course, marry a man simply because he is wealthy. But if she is given the choice between two wealthy men, one with and one without manners, she will choose the man who possesses them. For if a man has mastered the rules of governing good manners, a woman may be sure that he will never at any time question her ideal value as a woman, something he has been conditioned to respect by a series of additional admissions, not even when she has long ceased to attract him. Psychologists state that laughter as such engenders happiness, that faith comes with prayer. This is true, but only for men. If he treats women as a superior being, she will become a superior being for him. Women are far more capable of differentiation between fact and fiction. Good manners, as they call them, are not, unlike other methods of manipulation, the result of continued forms of behavior due to profound psychological influences. Children are taught to behave relatively late in life, and this is particularly easy to pick out as a form of women's exploitation. What is incredible is that even today such old tricks are still successful. The audacity of the advice a mother might well give to her teenage son the first time he takes a young lady to the theater is a good example of this. Pay the taxi, get out first, open the door on the girl's side and help her out. Conduct her up the steps, or if they are crowded, walk behind her in case she stumbles so that you may catch her. Open the door into the foyer for her, help her out of her coat. Take the coat to the cloakroom attendant. Get her a program. Go in front of her when you are taking your seats and clear the way. Offer her refreshments during the interval, and so on. On top of that, we should not forget that the average type of play is an outdated form of entertainment because most of them are aimed at the intellectual level of women, as indeed are many of those things which we like to label culture. Pity the poor man who has to submit to all of this. He probably has an inkling that not only he, but the assembled company directors, actors and producers awaiting them are there only to form the background for woman and her clique. This background is simply a place where she can indulge in her inane orgies, where she and the other women can take part in their grotesque masquerades, with the extras, the men, suitably costumed in black. The most cynical aspect of the good manners etiquette is the role of protector, which is forced on man. This begins harmlessly enough, it is true. He follows her when going upstairs, or walks on the traffic side of a pavement. It is when we reach the level of military service and war that the significance of this becomes more serious. One of the most important rules is that a man must, under all circumstances, protect a woman from unpleasantness, even if necessary, with his life. And as soon as he is old enough, he will do just that. His manipulation is accomplished at such an early age that in any given emergency, without a moment's reflection, he will save women and children before he thinks of himself, even at the cost of his own life. Yet there is really no valid reason why the role should not be reversed. As a woman is much less capable of any real depth of feelings, she would survive the horrors of war far better than a man to whom it will often cause lasting psychological damage. Menstruation has accustomed her to the sight of blood, and mother warfare requires staying power rather than intelligence and physical strength. Statistics have shown that women live longer than men, and therefore are tougher. Any normal North American woman who has played games at school must, for example, be at least as strong as the much smaller Vietnamese men. So, when a GI fights against an Asiatic people, his enemies are no stronger than his college girlfriends back home. We have already mentioned women's lack of emotional capacity. The fact that women make every attempt to suppress a man's ability to express his emotion is a certain indication of this. Yet she still contrives to create the myth of feminine depth, of feeling and vulnerability. The tear ducts are tiny pouches containing fluid. With training, they can be controlled, just as one controls the bladder, so that there is no more need for an adult to cry than there is for him to wet his bed. A male child is taught very early in life to control both of these functions. Once again, woman degrades herself. Boys don't cry. You're not a little girl, dear. Little girls, on the other hand, are never taught to control their tears, and they quickly learn to use them to their advantage. If a man sees a woman crying, it would never occur to him that she may be incontinent. He assumes her feelings are aroused to a considerable extent and even judges the degree of feeling by the quantity of liquid shed. This is obviously a mistaken interpretation. Women really are callous creatures, mainly because it is their disadvantage to feel deeply. Feelings might seduce them into choosing a man who is of no use to them, i.e., a man whom they could not manipulate at will. They might even actively come to dislike men, for after all, they are beings who should be very alien to them, and to decide to spend their lives exclusively in the company of women. In fact, however, there are far fewer homosexual women than homosexual men, and those are generally well-to-do, or at least financially secure. A woman with feelings would have to think and work, to take on responsibilities and learn to do without all the things which mean so much to her. Because she does not want this, she decides to remain callous, but she knows, at the same time, that it is necessary for a woman to enact the role of a sensitive being, or man would become aware of her essentially cold, calculating nature. Still, as her emotions are always faked and never felt, she can keep a clear head. You can take advantage of someone's feelings only if you're not involved yourself. Therefore, she turns her partner's emotions to her own profit, only taking care to make sure he believes she feels as deeply as he himself, perhaps even more deeply. She must make him believe she, as a woman, is much less stable, much more irrational, much more emotional. Only thus may her deception remain undetected. But manipulation has, in any case, already taken care of that. A real man neither weeps nor bursts into gales of noisy laughter. He may only smile discreetly. That will not only endear him to others, but will also make him appear reliable as a partner in business. He never shows surprise, never screams "ah" when a light goes on, or "ooh" when he touches cold water. He never shows that he's making an effort, such as "ugh" when he has lifted a heavy case. He doesn't even sing when he's happy. Therefore, if a man notices all these emotional reactions in a woman, it never occurs to him that he himself has in fact been conditioned by a woman not to express them at all. As a result, he assumes she has much stronger feelings, for otherwise she would not dare to exhibit them in such an uncontrolled manner. A man who only cries when a real catastrophe occurs, say, the death of his wife, must assume when his wife breaks into floods of tears, because of cancelled holiday plans for example, that her emotions are equally strong, but for a lesser cause. He even thinks himself loutish and callous because he cannot share her grief. What an advantage a man would have if only he realized the cold, clear thoughts running through a woman's head while her eyes are brimming with tears. Chapter 12. Sex as a Reward. Every method of manipulation is based on the carrot and stick system, and the degree of use of either depends to a large extent on the physical strength ration between trainer and trainee. Even when dealing with young children, there tends to be a preference for control by means of the carrot. This has the advantage of maintaining children's trust in adults so that even at the latter date they will still bring their problems to their parents. And so the process of manipulation is continued. This is much more effective than to start with the stick. If a captive dolphin has learned to do a trick, his trainer throws him a fish. Because the dolphin wants to eat, it'll do whatever is asked of him. Man, however, since he earns money, is quite capable of providing his own food. It would be impossible to bribe him in this way. He would, in fact, be above bribery altogether were it not for the one basic male need which has to be satisfied, the need for physical contact with a woman's body. This need is so strong, and its fulfillment gives a man such intense pleasure, that one is tempted to feel it is probably the prime reason for his voluntary enslavement to women in the first place. His longing for subjection may even be but a facet of his sexual makeup. The basis of any economy is a system of barter. Therefore, someone demanding a service must be able to offer something of equal value in exchange for it. But as a man must fulfill his sexual desires, and since he tends to want to hold exclusive rights over one vagina, the prices have risen to an extraordinate level. This has made it possible for women to follow a system of exploitation, which puts even the most capitalist of systems into the shade. And no man remains exempt. The concept of femininity is essentially sociological and hardly biological. Even a homosexual is unlikely to escape without paying his dues. The partner whose sexual drive is less developed quickly discovers the weak points of the other whose drive is more intense, and manipulates him accordingly. It will always be the woman or the female partner in any homosexual relationship who exploits the man. For to be a female means to be undersexed. Just as woman denies herself any depth of emotion, she denies herself a sexual appetite. How else could a young girl tell her boyfriend she loves him, but refuse him her body? Thanks to her mother's advice, a girl will suppress her desires even in puberty for the sake of the capital to be gained later. In former societies, a bride had to be a virgin to be worth anything, and even today a girl who has had less experience with sex will have a higher credit rating than the one who has had many lovers. Chastity in a man, on the other hand, has never had much value. As women do not really care for him, they are, of course, not interested in his chastity. For this very reason, a boy can never be raped by an older woman, only seduced. But let a man play the game with an adolescent girl. He will be hounded to prison as a sex criminal by a female mob. Men could, of course, condition their sexual needs as easily as women, but their training would need to start at a very early age. Monks are a sufficient proof of this. After all, the majority of them survive without sexual satisfaction. But instead of learning to suppress their needs, men allow them to be encouraged whenever possible. For the most part by women, of course. Their interests are mainly directed towards man's libido. Man is never dressed in such a way as to awake sexual desire in the opposite sex, but it is very much to the contrary with women. By the age of 12, she is already dolled up as bait. The curve of breast and hip are exaggerated by tight-fitting clothes, and the length of leg, the shape of calf, and ankle are enhanced by transparent stockings. Her lips and eyes beckon, moist with makeup, her hair with gleaming tints. And to what purpose, if not to stimulate the male to ever-increasing, everlasting sexual desire? She will offer her wares like goods in a shop window, apparently so near and at a price so easily obtained. No wonder men think that there is no greater happiness than to make enough money to pay for such tempting merchandise. If a man has no money, or at any rate no prospect of it, he will have to do without a woman, and consequently without sex. Nevertheless, in the relationship between the sexes, there is a certain credit system. In special circumstances, if the man is still being trained for his future profession, for example, a woman may be prepared to earn her own money and still allow him the use of her body. But this is only an advance against future returns. In such cases, the interest rates will be proportionately higher. The future job for which the man is studying must promise an income high enough to make her investment worthwhile. As a general rule, one can take it that the better endowed a woman is with sexual attractions, the more expensive the total cost will prove to be in the end. So, if a man thinks someone else's wife more attractive than his own, there is no need to feel depressed. He should remember how expensive she is likely to be. It would be far more economical for a man to satisfy his sexual needs with a prostitute instead of rushing into marriage. Prostitute in the conventional sense of the word, that is, since the majority of women belong by nature to this group. But his training intervenes yet again. As a result of his early conditioning as a member of a competitive society, he feels cheap sex has no real value. The greater the cost of the woman, the more sexual pleasure he will feel. And if he cannot get the woman he wants at any other rate, he will offer the highest price going. He will take her to the register office. This is the main reason why women happily tolerate the professional prostitute. Why should they mind when they never feel jealousy, as a man does? They may feel fake jealousy occasionally, of course, just to flatter him. They don't mind the institution of brothels either. Their attitude towards extramarital affairs is exactly the same, unless, of course, they become too obvious, in which case they tend to forgive them. How few women would leave an unfaithful husband, and how few men would stay with a woman in the same circumstances. Wives will often even welcome a philandering husband, for there are so many advantages arising from his gratitude for her tolerance and forgiveness. It is obviously preferable to women, however, if they can control the extramarital loves. This explains why the wife-swapping parties and pluralist sex practices are gaining in favor, for they tend to neutralize the sexual fantasies of husbands and men friends. What's more, these types of sexual release are free, whereas professional prostitution absorbs money which should be used for housekeeping. As the group of people is usually well acquainted, rules of hygiene can be imposed and there is less danger of venereal disease which a man might catch if he visits an anonymous brothel. And this is one of women's main worries as far as her husband's sexual adventures are concerned. It is a paradox that men despise the common prostitute, for she is the only woman who is honest about sex. Trades such as prostitution, acting, modeling, singing, or dancing are not generally practiced by men. But whereas a model or a singer, an actress or a dancer will still be able to catch a man when she is tired of her job, a prostitute has no such recourse. When she is tired or ill, there is no one there, waiting only for that very moment to be allowed to support her. No man in our society will allow a prostitute to exploit him as a photographic model, for instance, could. Women despise the common prostitute as well, but their reasons are different from men's. They despise her for her utter stupidity in selling her body so cheaply. For by female intelligence standards, they are simply too stupid for words. Female admiration is saved for a very different type. The sort of woman who catches a Rothschild, an Aga Khan, or a Rockefeller, and succeeds in marrying them. The concept of the lowest of the low, which women attach to professional prostitution, has only been adopted to put the fear of God into men, just in case they might one day start to draw parallels. The basic principle of sex as reward does not vary from woman to woman. They all offer themselves to a man, stress their charms, and then, providing he has performed his tricks satisfactorily, reward him. And since they never cease to keep him in the state of sexual excitement, he will demand the reward again and again. It is only men with a reduced sexual potency who can afford to make do with sporadic affairs and live the life of a hippie for years after years without feeling the need of a regular reward. One of the results of this female system of sex rewards is that a man with strong sexual needs must be more obedient to women than others. Look at the advertisements of dynamic, enterprising, energetic, enthusiastic young men, so much in demand in business. What are such men in fact but psychopaths, totally dependent on sex? Men who have set their standards in women too high. What other possible reason could a man have for using all his energy and imagination on selling a particular commercial product? It can only be for this reward. The whole world outside his office window beckons him with the promise of adventure. Yet so strong is his drive that he gladly forgoes all that is there and buys himself a woman with his hard-earned money instead. But even if he calls her his adventure, she will never be a substitute for what he has lost. When and if he meets her, everything will follow the strict system of supply and demand, with its rigid rules and almost total lack of surprise. The old saying that a woman's fate lies in her body is true indeed, if by fate we mean something positive. But in the negative sense, it is better applied to men. After all, a woman profits from her anatomical peculiarities whenever she can, while a man is an eternal slave to his. A male erection appears so grotesque to a woman the first time she hears about it that she can hardly believe it exists. The moment she realizes, though, that it can be produced by the slightest degree of provocation, and that it is not necessarily even that of a naked woman, a film or a photograph might do, then she will never cease to be amazed. It is, after all, a reflex action, rather like hitting someone on the knee. Probably no theory ever involved by a man has been as absurd as Freud's theory of penis envy. To a woman, the male penis and scrotum appear somewhat superfluous in man's otherwise neatly constructed body. They are almost untidy. It seems incredible to her that man cannot withdraw his penis after use and make it disappear, rather like an aerial on a portable radio. And as for envy, it would never occur, even to a little girl. Not even in her deepest unconscious would she ever wish to possess a penis. And as to being at a disadvantage compared to a little boy, that is nonsense, for she gets preferential treatment anyway. Freud was merely the victim of woman's self-abasement techniques, thanks to his mother, wife, and probably his daughters as well. He confused cause and effect. A woman only says she is worth less than a man. She doesn't really think it. If anyone ought to feel a sense of envy, it is men. They should be jealous of woman's power. But, of course, they never are, for they glory in their powerlessness. Chapter 13. Female Libido. As it is difficult to test or classify the degree to which women feel sexual stimulation, or to define the exact nature of a female orgasm, men get into considerable difficulties when they try to analyze her capacity for sexual excitability and orgasm. If they make any attempt to come to conclusions on the subject, they are forced to rely on a large extent to the voluntary information women give them. And since women have no respect for exact scientific data and are only interested in the immediate advantages to be obtained on any one occasion, they will only say what seems to be convenient or opportune at the time. Consequently, any facts acquired on the subject of women's reactions, whether, for instance, she is frigid, how far she is able to enjoy sexual intercourse, or whether her own orgasm can be compared to that of a man, tend to be extremely contradictory. And it is assumed even Masters and Johnson failed to get an average woman onto their test bed. As a result, man vacillates between the conviction that woman has no true sexual drive and the fear that she is really much more highly sexed than he, but that she refrains from telling him so out of pity. He will spend days working out bigger, better, and yet more subtle questionnaires in his efforts to come to some conclusion. And in the interest of science, he expects women to answer his questions truthfully, as if she could, or would. It is probable that the truth lies somewhere between the two extremes. Certainly women are not all nymphomaniacs, or there would be more male prostitutes. On the other hand, they do not feel an intense aversion to sex, as has so often been maintained. Women live a very animal existence. They like eating, drinking, sleeping, even sex, providing there is nothing to do and that no real effort is required of them. Unlike a man, a woman will never put herself out to get her partners into bed. If, however, he is already there, and she has neither planned to set her hair nor to undertake some other form of large-scale beauty repair, and there is no program on television that she has set her mind on, she will not be averse to making love, providing he is prepared to take on the active part. But even the euphemism active for the male partner and passive for the female do not conceal the fact that woman allows man to serve her in bed just as he does in every other sphere of life. Even when intercourse gives a man pleasure, it is basically nothing more than a service to a woman, since the man is the more accomplished lover. It is he who is apt to be more skilled in arousing her quickly, and it is he who is capable of making the act last longer for her sake. Man senses that woman tends to exploit him during intercourse, and has developed a certain fear of female sexual appetite. Signs of this appear in the rites of ancient cultures, in philosophical works of men such as Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, in the novels of Baudelaire, Balzac, or Motherland, in the plays of Steinberg, O'Neill, and Tennessee Williams. Since the discovery of oral contraceptives, this fear has reached almost hysterical proportions. Whole books are written about this, as to whether a man needs to worry about women's sexual demands, and if so, to what extent. And, at the same time, the commercial world has been provided with new opportunities to make money by selling men advice on how to obtain superiority in sexual matters. In actual fact, the invention of reliable contraceptive methods, invented, of course, by him, has robbed man of the only triumph still left to him in his state of sexual subjugation. Previously, woman was always to a certain extent at his mercy. Now she is suddenly in control. She can have as many or as few children as she wishes. She can even select the fathers, if possible rich, that she wants. Even if she has no intention of having children at all, she can indulge in intercourse as often as it appears advantageous to her. Man cannot do that. He has always claimed that his sexual potency is without limit, and that he only needed a woman who did not restrain herself to prove it. Today this is impossible. Any woman can read for herself in popular magazines exactly what the situation is as far as the male sex drive is concerned. She will know how active he will be at any given age, whether his best time is afternoon or night, if he is more satisfactory as a lover before or after a meal, and whether his prowess will be improved by mountain air or by a maritime climate. She knows how often he should be capable of making love on any one occasion in order to satisfy a woman. What's more, she can be sure of her statistics, for men would never cheat when giving information of this kind. A masculine man would consider it a sign of weakness to lie in any situation at all. So women can rely absolutely on the figures given and know exactly what a man should be able to achieve. He has provided her with charts to be able to know any man's potency at any given stage in his life. Not only know, but thanks to efficient birth control methods, try men out and compare the various types of sexual performance. Contrary to men's fear, they do not, however, weigh one man up against another and choose the most virile. Far from it, as she herself is not all that keen on sex. In view of that, and provided all other conditions are equal, she is much more likely to prefer the less potent type of a man because she can always blackmail him with her intimate knowledge of his weaknesses. In the sexual field, more than any other, man is a victim of the principles of efficiency according to which it is manipulated. Indeed, he sets his own stands. 3 times in a row equals very good, twice equals good, once equals satisfactory. If he fails as a sex machine, he is, in his opinion, a total failure. Even if he is a brilliant scientist, he will never really be happy again. Women know all this and make good use of the advantage it provides. For example, case number 1. She can act as if she is unaware of her husband's lack of virility and continue to praise him for his prowess, probably the most frequent method applied. Number 2. She can make a man believe his sexual failure is a real handicap and that he can consider himself lucky she stays with him. Number 3. She can threaten to expose his sexual inadequacy unless he does everything she wants, and since man would rather be called a thief or a murderer than impotent, he will bow his head to his fate and do what he is told. Man's sexual potency depends on psychological factors more than any other of his bodily functions. Once he has begun to doubt his potency, he gradually finds himself in more and more difficulty. His fears of becoming useless to a woman increase because, as a result of his manipulation by women, he identifies his masculinity with his dependence on them. Therefore, because he equates his state of dependence with masculinity, he will resort to every possible means to remain dependent. One really should reflect on the absurdity of this situation. Aphrodisiacs, once hidden discreetly under the counter and usually prepared by quacks, have long since become socially acceptable and are now best-selling products of the pharmaceutical industry. Even in serious publications, the number of articles on sexual difficulties are on the increase, and men's room jokes, which, as we all know, are the result of man's castration anxiety, are heard more frequently, though they are usually quite unfunny. And men certainly do not buy pornographic magazines for pleasure. There are so many better and more sophisticated ways of amusing themselves. The interest lies solely in hope, the hope of finding in such a powerful stimulation some means of retaining this mystical level of masculine virility. In all his panic, he is once again the victim of his habit of thinking of women in terms of his own standards. He really believes that women, now safe from the dangers of conception, having nothing else in their heads but their desire to make up for all the lost time and to spend their lives making love. This is a natural assumption, since he has been manipulated to think sex the epitome of all pleasure. He is, of course, quite mistaken. A woman will certainly feel happy when she has an orgasm, but it is not the most intense pleasure she knows. A cocktail party or the purchase of a new pair of aubergine-coloured patent leather boots rates far higher. Man's fear of losing ground at the sexual or physical level as a result of woman's newfound freedom is, of course, quite absurd. No matter how much a woman enjoys making love, she will never let the man who supports her tire himself to such a point that he might be late at the office the next morning. That is too big of a risk to take. Even the most passionate woman will reduce her sexual activities if she thinks nights spent in making orgiastic love are beginning to affect his work. Nymphomaniacs exist almost solely in films and plays, which is why they catch the interest of the general public, just as the rich elite, who are only a small fraction of the population, are so often portrayed in films and novels. The general public is curious because it is a life of which they know nothing. There is only one aspect of a man's sexual potency which will concern a woman, whether he is capable of fathering children or not. Children, as we shall see later, are an essential to a woman if she is to bring her plans to fruition. It's quite feasible that many women would be only too happy if man's needs for sex would dry up after she had produced 2 or 3 children. He would do away with numerous small inconveniences. The sexual competence in a man is a matter of indifference to the majority of the female sex, and this is shown by the number of highly paid men who marry and stay married, despite the fact that they are impotent. One can hardly imagine a woman without a vagina having much chance of marriage with a normally sexed man. Chapter 14. Manipulation through Bluff. Man's strong sexual drive, his brilliant mind, and his need for a system which will help him bear those responsibilities which his intelligence has led him to recognize, have enabled women to make effective use of certain institutions which belong by right to the past. Institutions like the church, the many non-conformist sects, and other religious communities. She cold-bloodedly uses them to help with the manipulation of her small children. She exploits their armies of clergymen and other functionaries as a kind of military police force designed to protect women's interests even after her children are grown up. Nevertheless, women themselves are not, as we have seen, superstitious, neither do they have any true religious faith. Unless a boy's manipulation has been exceptionally successful, as in the case of those who decide to become priests, men are equally unlikely to believe in the dogma of their church. If, however, they've been subject to its teachings from a very early age, they do help to provide certain definite archetypes and a useful basis for the standards of good and evil. These are standards which have no rational roots, but have become part of men's subconscious and are therefore ineradicable. By their very nature, these standards are always those adopted by women. Any religious system must be based on manipulation, since it consists of a series of rules and taboos, with a catalogue of penalties subsequent on failure to keep to those rules. These trespasses are the so-called sins. The penalties are, of course, never imposed in reality, for faith in some kind of super-consciousness is a system without real foundation, and therefore there will be no one around to know about such secret sins or to want to extract punishment for them. As a result, people are apt to say that a misfortune which cannot be averted, like the loss of a friend or an earthquake, is a punishment. In earlier times, when men's understanding of disasters such as plagues, crop failures, and lightning was so much less, they believed they were punishments for sins committed at some previous time. These, they thought, could only be avoided in the future by unconditional surrender to the rules, or by repentance, a kind of brainwashing. The myth obviously becomes transparent as man's mind develops. He can probe its fallacy by committing a sin without incurring any subsequent signs of wrath. But the deep-seated fear of punishment, the feeling of having sinned, carefully cultivated during a child's earliest years, will prevent him, as an adult, from doing something that was considered bad while he was a child. And if, by chance, he does do something which as a child he called a sin, he will have, at the very least, a bad conscience. There is one form of sin which is bound to figure in the dogma of almost any religion: the sin of indulging in the pleasure of the sexual act when reproduction is not intended. This is a sin which men inevitably commit, thus breaking the rules of earlier beliefs and making themselves suffer from guilty consciousness. Spurred on by women, men are always ready to make love and take any opportunity they are offered. The very last thing that they would think of at the moment of orgasm is the fact that they are propagating the species. At such moments, man is, therefore, more than usually deceived. Women who, on the other hand, have learned to control their sexual urge always make love with some purpose in view. This may be conception with an eye to the future breadwinners who will provide for her, or because she wants to satisfy a man. In the latter instance, her motives are charitable. It is unlikely to be an act of pleasure, pure and simple. Consequently, it is not a sin that they commit, and even if it were, they certainly wouldn't feel any pangs of conscience afterwards. Unlike men who are constantly forming new resolutions which they never stick to, women do not have such a debit or guilt account in any system made for their use. even if they believed in such a system. With their tendency of self-abasement, their suppressed and stunted sexual needs, their assumption that they will survive without working by letting others work for them, they are like the effigy set up as an ideal and guide to men. Jesus Christ or Gandhi, an ideal which can never be attained and merely serves to confirm male beliefs that all truly admirable qualities are, in the last analysis, feminine. Yet, in reality, neither women nor their chosen police force, the clergy, are really interested in man's sexual drive. The taboo did not have to concern this particular instinct. They merely chose it because it is man's greatest and purest pleasure. Had he found as much satisfaction in smoking or eating pork, women would have made him equate those with sin. The main thing is that he lives in a state of sin, a state of fear, and is thus open to manipulation. This is one of the reasons why the catalogue of sins varies according to man's age. For a small child, the taboo is lying, covering the property of others, and not honoring one's father and mother. For an adult, it is sexual desire and lusting after his neighbor's wife. Yet how can they recognize these as sins when at first they know neither rules nor the system under which they were established? How can they believe in something which does not exist, or feel ashamed of a pleasure which does not hurt anyone? Anything which deals with religious beliefs is contrary to the rules of reason, and consequently has to be instilled at an age when a sense of logic is still undeveloped. If possible, the manipulation should take place in a building of such absurd design and architecture that the absurdity that which is preached in it is equal to it, thus making it all a little less incredible. And those who are purveyors of this type of illogical thinking should, if possible, look different from other people. If children are taught by men who dress like women, for example, or who adopt some other form of masquerade, their pupils' bewilderment and awe will be all the greater, and the respect for these figures will never quite leave them. Women have taken great care to ensure that their lobby, the clergy, are always men. Firstly, because the female image might be damaged if they represent their own interests. Men might think them calculating. And secondly, because they know men rate feminine intelligence rather low. This, of course, is why they can only play on a man's emotions. But advice which comes from another man, and one respected from childhood, is much more likely to be listened to and taken. Clergy are not the enemy of normal men just because their advice always benefits women. A man should stay with his wife even if he does not love her. He should look after the children he never wanted. The attitude of the clergy is merely the direct consequence of their financial dependence on women. Women would survive well if the church did not exist at all. They only needed to help them manipulate their young, and as background for special clothes on special occasions. The church, on the other hand, would be ruined without the support of women. Children can be manipulated and indeed are very often raised without the benefit of the church today. It is quite feasible that women one day might give up the nave of a church as the most effective background for a white dress. Such trends would empty the churches in a couple of years. In the Soviet Union, marriage palaces have replaced them as a wedding background. If this became the fashion, people would see the churches for what they really are, relics of a long dead age. They would withdraw their financial support, both public and private, which, in the last resort, has always been provided by men. It is man who pays his own tormentors. So when we hear someone say what magical power the church has, since it still draws people to it after many hundreds of years, the situation has obviously been misunderstood. It is not the church which possesses a magical power, it's women. All such institutions have long since become mere tools in the hands of women, and it is highly unlikely that they will ever do anything other than fulfill women's expectations. The sufferers are quite often those who represent the various religious communities, for they only want to live a peaceful, undisturbed life, at the expense of masculine men, of course, just like women. Thanks to women, they have become a kind of mafia with which to frighten children, enslave men, and put a brake on the progress. These men are forced, under the threat of boycott, to appear in ludicrously effeminate clothes, to intone grotesque songs loudly, and to tell horror stories to an audience sometimes consisting even of intelligent people. All this despite the fact that these stories with which they are making such abject fools of themselves have long been discarded by modern theology and stand in obvious contrast to all they have been taught as students at their universities. Modern theology, of course, is useless for conditioning purposes now that it has renounced the carrot and stick policy. Women need those moth-eaten tales of heaven and hell, of devils and angels, of paradise and judgment day. Death can only be used as a convenient deterrent if it is a door leading either to eternal happiness or to eternal damnation. Which of these two realms this door may lead to is dependent on a kind of point system, scored according to earthly achievement and calculated by women. If life everlasting can be won only by faithfulness and slavery, it falls in with the interest of women, interest which would in no way be helped if men decided to investigate eternal life in biological terms, an investigation we might have to wait some time for. Women themselves are, of course, quite unmoved by all of these myths. They go to church only as and when they want. Their conscience does not bother them either way. For the big ceremonies, which are really attempts at intimidation on the part of women, not on that of the clergymen, they array themselves in suitable attire: wedding dress, christening clothes, mourning clothes, confirmation dress, and put their men in the usual dark suits. They enact the role of believer, of the superstitious or doubter of the faith, but in reality their minds are elsewhere. Male speculations on the possibilities of walking on water, turning water into wine by magic, or by achieving, also with the help of magic, an immaculate conception, leave them cold. As usual, their interest does not concern itself with the essence of the thing as such, but with its possibilities of exploitation. If a man of another faith wants to marry them and demands their conversion as a condition in exchange for his own promise to work for them, women would not hesitate for a moment. Chapter 15. Commercialized Prayers. For most men, all that remains of the religious faiths of childhood are a few conditioned behavioral reflexes, such as love of truth, the enjoyment of honest, hard work, or a pleasure in non-freedom. From the moral point of view, everyone should have the right to lie. It helps us to stave off society's often too bold attempts to supervise us, and thus minimizes our own personal fight for existence. The disadvantage of lying is that if everyone does it, it loses its power. If anyone is gullible enough to believe something which is not true, he must himself love the truth and assume a similar love in others. Consequently, a lie becomes a luxury. It has a rarity value. The rarity value has to be maintained by incessant denigration in the interest of liars. Therefore, it is very important that women teach men love of truth, for only if he loves truth is she able to afford the luxury of lying. For contemporary society to survive at all, men must believe in truth. They do the work, and no practical, i.e. no logical system can function on lies. In our contemporary, highly developed system of society, where all labor is divided, each man must be able to work with him and rely on the other. If men were to take to lying when the moment seemed opportune, say in matters like train schedules, freighters' capacities, or the amount of fuel left in an airplane's tank, the effect on our communal system would be disastrous. Within a very short time, there will be complete chaos. Women, however, can lie with a clear conscience. They are not involved in the process of work, so their lies will only harm one person, usually the husband. And if it is not discovered, it is not a lie at all. It is feminine guile. The only crime which does not come under this heading is physical unfaithfulness, which a man will not forgive. As a man has been conditioned by women's self-abasement, it seems natural to him that she should use guile, weak and dependent creature that she is, as the only way in which he can hope to guide this powerful, sex-obsessed giant, this unfortunate, wretched animal. It's no wonder that women, having proved guile a success, talk quite openly about it. You will read about it in their favorite media, women's magazines. Mothers hand it out as advice to their daughters. Why not? It's quite justified, since all their comfort depends on it. For they are both frequently forced to exploit the same man, first the mother's husband, and later, perhaps, if the mother lives under the same roof, the daughter's husband. After all, their whole future comfort depends on whether he comes to heel. Of course, women would never openly forbid a man to lie. They simply associate lying with repugnance. This is easily done by means of the chosen system of religious faith, which connects lying with the idea of a fictional punishment, or by a kind of personal magic. If a mother tells her child not to lie to her because it's bad, he will automatically have a guilty conscience if he does. She does not even need to be specific about this badness. The child believes her implicitly, is dependent on it, and relies upon what she tells him. He believes she would never lie. This is nonsense, of course, for mothers constantly tell their children the most barefaced lies. The same magic is involved when, later on, a woman convinces her husband that unfaithfulness is something squalid and wretched. You must never deceive me. Or if she happens to be one of those tolerant wives who say, it's not so bad if you deceive me, but you must never under any circumstance leave me, a generous woman, and he will obey her order, for such it is, without doubting its justification. Once in a while he will sleep with another woman, but he will rarely leave her, although the admission of such boundless indifference should really be a signal for him to go, and do so at once. Only one circumstance in a man's life will ever make him tell a lie, and that is when he, as a result of pent-up desire, has slept with another woman, although he dearly loves his own wife. He is so afraid of the possible consequences of truth, she might do the same thing herself, that he will suffer the most agonizing pangs of conscience rather than admit the truth. But if he has merely smashed up the car and maybe even killed someone in the process, if he has behaved treacherously towards someone else, or taken a day off work, he would rather clear his conscience and tell her. A woman's reactions are exactly the opposite. She will keep quiet about absolutely everything except her interest in another man, or that man's interest in her. And if 2 or 3 other men are attracted, she will use the situation to her advantage by commercializing it at once. She tells her husband just to make sure he knows there is someone else to look after her if necessary. This alone is enough to bring a man up to scratch and increase his rate of output immediately. We have already mentioned man's desire to be unfree. This leads to religious fervor and prayer, a fact which is still true today, for pop songs are only a modified version of childhood prayers. The god of former days has been conveniently replaced by the goddess, woman, who is right at hand. Man's happiness really does depend on woman. Even the content of the prayers remains virtually the same. The longing to submit oneself to a higher power, the plea that she will listen to him and be merciful, or simply idealization. It doesn't matter whether one says, "So take my hands," or "and thy right hand shall hold me," or "fly me to the moon." It all amounts to the same in the end. Some modern records do still praise the old god, but it is only the choice of words which shows they are not directly referring to women. Thou who makest all things grow. Prayers in religious songs, i.e. prayers to music, ease existential anxiety. They appeal to a superego on whose every whim all happiness depends. The superego allows us to relax and accept life and frees us from the pursuit of happiness, for everything lies in the hands of our God. As man grows older, his fear increases. He has come to realize why it is justified, and increasingly, his wish to let go grows too. This need to relax for a few moments at least, and to commit himself to this almighty power. In the old days, intellectual men used to work out their fears by writing love poems which took the place of prayer and calmed them down. Nowadays, this form of adoration has become superfluous, for the current supply of pop songs, the dark longings of men, naturally commercialized at their own expense, increases, and their lyrics, those of the Beatles for instance, satisfy even more of the most sophisticated of taste. There are of course also some hits sung specifically in praise of men. The few that there are usually songs first made popular by a male singer and then sung by a woman. In general, however, women only sing hymns of love which, since men need them for love, is almost the same as singing hymns to themselves. Still, at some stage, they seem to have discovered that they could sing their own praises without it being too obvious, and since then, women have ceased to worry. They praise their own magnificence, their fickleness, their cruelty, and the self-complacency with which they give themselves to men, whether to save or to destroy them. When Marlene Dietrich sang in The Blue Angel that love is my world and my nature and nothing else, All I can do is make love, that's all, and men flutter around me like moths and burn up and I can't help it, she was expressing just these sentiments. If women can think of themselves as divine, just how divine must they be? In real life, of course, women are far more subtle in their exploitation of the male sex than in the film. They don't ruin men immediately. They are quite prepared to take a whole lifetime over it. After all, who is going to kill the goose that lays so many golden eggs? That's why when men were able to laugh over the wretched figure of the professor instead of recognizing in him a portrait of themselves. Think of Nancy Sinatra's great hit, which says the same thing in a slightly different way. These boots are made for walking, and that's what they're gonna do. One of these days, these boots will walk all over you. A hit indeed, for it satisfies man's need and longing for a cruel goddess on the one hand, and woman's claim to omnipotence on the other. Chapter 16. Conditioning of Self. The ideal of any trainer would be to bring an animal to the stage when it is capable of training itself. This is something which still has to be achieved. But man is not an animal, and there comes a point when he does continue his own training, because he is much more intelligent than his female trainer. It'll be a very successful maneuver as long as he never forgets the purpose of his education and keeps both reward and punishment always in mind. The world of pop songs is one of the facets of man's efforts at his own manipulation. The best example of self-conditioning, however, is to be found in the advertising industry. In advertising, he does not idealize women from any masochistic tendency. It is purely a question of survival. Only his exploiters, women, have sufficient time and money to buy and consume all of his products. To supply the woman inhabiting his villa with purchasing power, he has no choice but to cultivate legions of other women who have as much satisfaction as his own wife in spending. They will then buy his goods and keep his wife in pocket. This is the beginning of a vicious circle which turns faster and faster until he cannot keep up with it anymore and someone else has to take over. There is no stop the world, I want to get off. Market research institutes investigate what they like to call subliminal female stimuli. The conscious ones have long since been satisfied, and then sell their discoveries to the consumer goods industry. The latter then hurries to fill these so-called gaps in the consumer market, as if there were in fact such things. Or sometimes they work in reverse. The producer invents a new article which he believes might appeal to women, and then hires an advertising agency to create the necessary consumer interest. Sometimes with success, sometimes without. The American craze for prefabricated houses, for example, has never caught on to any large extent in any of the European countries. Every few years, a wave of indignation sweeps over the male ranks as a result of this expensive fostering of the female craze for consumption. They have been blinded by the stereotyped image of woman as victim of male exploitation to such an extent that they do not realize that they themselves are, in fact, the sufferers. They maintain that women's naivete and their gullible, i.e. stupid natures, are exploited by advertisers for the purpose of increasing sales. Sometimes these men should go around to asking themselves, who is really being exploited? It is the creature whose innermost wishes are sought out, coddled and fulfilled, or is it he who, in his desire to retain the affections of the former, seeks out, coddles and fulfills them? It has always been one of man's greatest aims in life to fulfill women's innermost desires, to anticipate her every wish, in fact, as contemporary women's fiction still puts it. Well, they have reached their goal. There is practically no female desire left undiscovered, and almost next to none which could not, if necessary, be fulfilled. The result is that women are getting increasingly more stupid, while men grow more and more intelligent. The gap between the sexes is widening constantly, making mutual understanding virtually impossible. But no one seems to notice. It's one of the basic principles of biology that intelligence develops only in the face of competitive stimulation. Women, though, stand outside every competitive field. The glut of modern conveniences dulls their brains, reducing even what little is left of their capacity for thought. Men, on the other hand, prodded by the need to create discomfort, to open up new sources of income, has to exert himself more and more. Surrounded by this ever-increasing comfort, the female race is changing for the worse. The concept of femininity used to be applied to a woman who had the ability to bear children. It was also applied to venality. The definition must be changed to include imbecility. If Marx is right, and the word being determines the extent of man's being aware, the pill, for instance, would determine sexual mores, and the atom bomb stalemate the ideologies of peace, to the same extent the self-awareness of Western women, whose situation in life has changed, or improved, basically over the last 20 years, is now in a state of acute transformation. This metamorphosis, which can only result in the utter stultification of women, is all the more dangerous because no one seems to have noticed it. Women's image is no longer created by women, but by advertising, that is, by men. And if anyone even starts to doubt the truth of women's value, then there are 100 snappy advertising slogans ready at hand to disprove such a thought. Advertising says that women are witty, intelligent, creative, imaginative, warm-hearted, practical, and capable. Smiling sweetly with all the airs of a goddess, she dispenses the latest discovery in instant drinks to her grateful brood. Her husband's eyes follow her adoringly as she serves up a new pre-cooked meal, which is so much more to his taste. Or maybe she hands him a Turkish towel which is still softer, the result of a new finishing rinse. This image of woman, created by man in order to sell his goods, is repeated incessantly with the help of mass media and throughout the Western Hemisphere. And each day it is being reinforced. How could anyone dare to admit, even to themselves, that in reality women are unimaginative, stupid, and insensitive? It would obviously be too much to expect of women, and it is an admission men cannot afford. Woman buys, man sells, but one does not convince a customer by saying, "It's good, you've got to buy it." Instead we say, "You're marvelous, you deserve the best. Why should you make do with anything less? You've earned your comfort. You are entitled to it." So, on top of everything else, man has to flatter woman because he needs her as a customer. It is interesting that the trick men are using here is similar to the one used by women during his manipulation, only with a difference. Man turns it against himself. She praises him to make him work for her, but he praises her to make her spend his money. After all, if a man flatters and talks his neighbor's wife into buying a new wall-to-wall carpeting, he must reckon with the fact that his neighbor will, in his turn, sell his own wife a heatable bathtub the next day. For how else could he pay for the carpeting if he didn't? Man, in fact, is caught up in the trap of his own making. For while the battle for money is getting fiercer outside the home every day, inside it his wife is growing more moronic. Every day his house is being stuffed with more junk and useless trash, which she herself buys, thus helping to finance the stultification of his competitors' wives. In reality, a man likes things to be simple and functional, but every day he finds himself getting more and more entangled in some undergrowth of scroll work and ornamentation. The china cats, bar stools, glass-top tables, candlesticks, and silk cushions pile up in ever-increasing heaps. His bedroom walls are covered with flowery wallpaper. His cabinets display a dozen different sets of glasses, yet if he wants to find a place for his razor in the bathroom, he will be unlucky. All the shelf space is already taken up with 1,001 beauty preparations, lotions, face creams, and makeup kits of his awfully painted wife. It is interesting to note that nearly the only products the agencies try to sell to a man are articles which are really only of benefit to women. A sports car with which to entice her, luxury goods as presents, or household appliances, obviously for a woman, since the house is hers. Man himself is a creature who has no home. He commutes between bungalow and office. Of course, women love to buy things for their husbands whenever possible. Presents bought, naturally enough, with his own money. They get him ties, gaily colored shirts for the weekend, ashtrays, wallets, and so on, as often as possible. But the trouble is that men need so little. Their clothing is standardized and therefore cheap to produce. Their consumption of food and drink is limited in case it affects their working capacity. And everything else, apart from cigarettes which he smokes in the office, is simply a waste of his time. Industry has made every effort to get men interested in aftershave lotions, hairsprays, or gaily colored leisure wear, but usually in vain. Only young men will take to the latest and short-lived fashion. Their working capacity, however, is still too low to interest women. Rich men, whom women love anyway, and artists who act as some kind of court jester to them, are allowed to sport the latest in clothes, and queers maybe, but not the average man. Another example of this is Father's Day, which no amount of effort on the part of advertising has succeeded in establishing. Mother's Day, on the other hand, is boom time to everyone concerned, and everybody cashes in on it. The best thing men can do on their day of celebration is retire to a pub and have a few beers in peace. Apart from eating, drinking, and smoking, sex is the only activity where man is an independent consumer. He must be able to satisfy his sexual urge. No wonder whole branches of industry are given over to this trade, taking advantage of this need to make him still randier and to persuade him to buy goods which merely serve to increase his desire. Satisfaction, of course, is another matter. That has to be had from a woman at the customary price. As such firms are usually run by men, man, in order to live, finds himself in the embarrassing position of having to make leches of his fellow males. He tends male desire for women in every conceivable way and proceeds much like Pavlov with his dog, working on the system of conditioned reflexes. Pavlov made his dog's mouth water merely by ringing a bell, which meant dinner. In this case, man encourages his fellow men to get an erection by producing photos of half-naked breasts by means of suggestive sigh in a pop song, perhaps, or by writing a certain sentence in a book. This is why he will produce a whole range of methods of obtaining an erection, provided that the other man can pay for it. And of course, this mechanism does not bring returns only to the erotica industry. All other branches take advantage of it too. Presents for women are sold to men by means of a picture of an attractive female bosom. A man will read a certain book or see a film because he hopes it may give him a kick, and as a secondary effect, he may suddenly feel the desire to go around the world with his woman, to buy a weekend bungalow in the mountains or get a sports car. The American men's magazine Playboy provides us with one of the best proofs of man's method of self-conditioning. Sandwiched between wonderful pairs of naked breasts are excellent editorial contributions of a highly theoretical nature to entertain him and to offer him respite between erections. All of this is framed by offers of expensive cars, spirits, unnecessary clothing, or smokers' accessories. Women get the creeps from magazines like these, but men have lost all sense of the grotesque implicit in this situation. The cult of the bosom has become something quite independent, something depersonalized. The sex industry has told men so often and so well that women's breasts are there to attract him that he has quite forgotten their real purpose. The diversion was 100% successful. As a result of the invention of fully equivalent substitutes for mother's milk, he very rarely has a chance to watch a baby feed at its mother's breast. Chapter 17. Children as Hostages. Children are certainly very endearing, but that in itself is no reason for producing them. Anyone who creates a child is in the process of creating an adult, a man or a woman. Since most adult men live in a state of permanent hell, and the happiness of most women is not only primitive, but is obtained mostly at the cost of other people, why should one bother to produce them? It would not be true to maintain that only women are interested in having children. Men want them too. Children are one of the 2 or 3 excuses by which they justify their subjection to women. Women, on the other hand, have to have children in order to justify their laziness, stupidity, and lack of responsibility. Both sexes exploit the child, therefore, for their own ends. Although the whole world is full of half-starved orphans, each couple goes on producing its own brood. Man must have a reason to be enslaved when, later on, his sexual powers have been declined, and this reason must also explain his enslavement to a particular woman. This is simple. She is, after all, the mother of his children. Since for him the woman is his alibi for subjugation, he can at the same time only make use of one, for in an industrial society, man is monotheistically inclined, and that for man is monogamy. More than one god, more than one woman, would only confuse him, lead him to question his own identity, and throw him back into the state of freedom he is trying to escape all the time. A woman does not bother about questions such as these. She is incapable of abstract thought, so the problems of existential anxiety do not touch her. She has no need for a god to give more point to her life. All she needs is an excuse for making one particular man work for her long after his desire for her has cooled. So she has to have children by just this man. If by any chance there was to be a surplus of men on this earth, so that there was one woman to every 3 men, for example, she would not hesitate to have a child by each. She would make each father provide for his own child, that is, for herself, and play one off against the other. Just think of the extent to which man's achievements, and her comfort, could be increased. Woman, contrary to popular opinion, is far more inclined to be polygamous than man. When a man produces children with a woman, he gives her hostages and hopes she will blackmail him forever. It's the only thing that gives him some sort of stability, and the only way of justifying the senseless slavery for which he has been conditioned. When he works for his wife and child, he is not so much working for the 2 particular human beings who do not look after themselves. One will not because she is female, and the other cannot because he is too small. He is working for something more important. He is working for a system which embraces everything that is poor, helpless, and in need of protection in this world. In fact, poor, helpless, and in need of protection as such, and which, as he believes, really does need him. Thanks to wife and child, man has acquired an alibi, an artificial justification for his wretched existence, for his subjection. He calls this arbitrarily created system, this whole unit, his family. Woman accepts his service in the name of the family, accepts the hostages he entrusts to her, and proceeds to carry out his desires by binding him ever more tightly to her and blackmailing him until he dies. And to whose gain? Hers. Both man and woman only stand to gain by having children, otherwise they would not produce them. Man's advantage lies in the fact that he appears to lead a more meaningful life, and that he is able to become a slave forever. And woman has all the other advantages. These must be considerable, for any female today has the choice between a professional life or having children, and nearly all of them choose children. One might raise the point that women decide in favor of a home and family simply because they love children, but women are not capable of the degree of emotion that totally unselfish love for a child demands. This fact can easily be proved. Women only bother about their own children, never about those of others. A woman will only take a child who is not her own when she is physically incapable of giving birth, and this is only after everything else has been tried, including artificial insemination by a donor who is not her husband. Although orphanages throughout the world are full of appealing, needy children, although newspapers and television reports daily on the number of little Africans, Indians, or South Americans who have died of starvation, a woman would rather give a stray dog or cat a home than some deserted child, and yet she pretends to love children. Any news magazine will give the figures on the high rate of abnormal births every year. 1 in 60 of all babies are born deformed, with water on the brain, missing limbs, blind, deaf, or feeble-minded. Yet this does not stop women from producing them. It is almost as if they were in the grip of an evil spell. If a woman gives birth to a deformed or Mongol child, she never feels that her egoism is finally unmasked, that she must take full responsibility for the disaster. As the mother of a feeble-minded child, she will be treated like a martyr, respected and admired. And if she doesn't have one already, she will have another child as soon as possible, a normal baby, like the babies of other women, so that she can prove she is healthy. She would never think that she is forcing the second healthy child to spend its whole youth, his whole life in fact, in the company of a moron. It's difficult to prove that women do not really love children and that they only use them to their own advantage. After all, pregnancy, childbirth, and the care of an infant are not without some degree of unpleasantness and discomfort. Such factors are unimportant, however, when one considers what a woman is getting in exchange: lifelong security, comfort, and freedom from responsibility. Can one imagine what a man would have to undertake to achieve a situation even approaching a woman's state? The pregnancy is not really as unpleasant as people make it seem. Many women feel healthier when expecting a child, and it is even becoming the fashion to admit it openly. Why should they worry if they appear ugly and unattractive, their figure lumpy, their skin spotty, hair stringy, and their legs swollen? They are not after a man now. They already have one. He, of course, has no choice, but has to watch his butterfly turn into a caterpillar. He did it, after all. It is his child she is expecting, his child who is deforming her. What right has he to find her clumsy and repulsive? And, after all, she is losing her youth because of him. As far as giving birth itself is concerned, the rumors still surrounding it are so hair-raising that it would never occur to a man that women bear children for their own sake and not for his. The phrase, "she presented him with a child," so popular in the novels of previous centuries, may well have gone out of use in contemporary literature. But as far as men are concerned, it has been fixed in their consciousness, and when the offspring arrives, they are filled with feelings of guilt because of the sufferings of the woman. Not those of the newborn infant, please note. Yet a man only has to imagine that, in return for spending 6 hours at the dentist's, he will be offered a sinecure for life. He would certainly accept such an offer. Of course, difficult births do occur, but they are, as a rule, painless since the advent of anesthetics. In general, a woman suffers no more during childbirth than she would during a prolonged session at the dentist's. What women tell men about giving birth is usually shamelessly exaggerated. The ear-splitting shrieks from the delivery rooms which penetrate their ears are no more than a sign of lack of self-control and pride with which we have already dealt at length elsewhere. Painless birth has existed for years. Women are prepared with the aid of gymnastics and autogenous training to have their children without anesthetics or discomfort. In fact, it will be considerably to women's advantage if they could decide just what they are going to tell the men. While some say it is agony and others that it is not, they are not only damaging themselves, but also their common cause. Of course, an assumed air of helplessness and a subsequent alibi for spending their lives doing easy work without a boss ordering them around is not the only reason why women produce little human beings. One day, for example, a woman may discover that her body functions rather like a slot machine. You put in something insignificant and trifling, and something quite different and rather fabulous falls out. Of course, she is tempted to try this wonderful game. And when she has played it once, she will repeat it over and over again. It nearly always works. Exactly 9 months later, out comes a human being. She is quite beside herself with joy and thinks she is simply marvelous. The operation of this slot machine is only as legitimate as hitting someone on the head and crushing his skull and then watching him fall down because it is biologically possible. If each game with her body slot machine did not involve a slight bit of effort for her later, she would soon become insatiable. As it is, she finds herself forced to draw the line, usually at the point where one more child would only increase her workload, but not her security and comfort. As a rule, this limit is easily determined, usually by the degree of automation in any one household. In highly industrialized countries, the average woman aims at having 2 or 3 children. In North America, where housework is almost wholly automatic, the optimum is nearer 3. In Western Europe, where there is still a lack of certain amenities, the ideal is near to 2. An only child is seldom desirable, while more than 3 is virtually considered antisocial because of noise and the smell of washing. An only child has no real advantages attached to it, only disadvantages. The woman does not seem as unprotected and tied to her home as she should be. Apart from that, something might happen to the child, possibly even when the mother is already too old to have another. Then she would have no excuse left for making things more comfortable for herself than for her husband, and the man no reason to go on working for her alone. There is also the point that an only child has no playmates. The mother might even have to play with it herself, and if there is anything a woman loathes, it is playing with her children. It is difficult for her too, because children are interested in and want to know about absolutely everything, where she has no interest at all, apart from the few idiotic forms of entertainment offered by her house and her own body. Therefore, even with the best will in the world, it is difficult for a mother to enter into the adventurous world of a child. She may have a small repertoire of insipid stock phrases to amuse the toddler, such as, "Look who's coming now," but by the age of 2, a child has started to think for himself, and woman is left behind. The cliché about the common interests of father and son, father cannot stop playing with his son's model railway, cannot be applied to mother and son, or even to mother and daughter. If a woman actually makes an effort and spends half an hour playing with her child, more might be bad for its mental development, she will tell the whole world about it as if it were a great achievement, which of course it is in terms of self-denial. To guarantee material security and allow a woman to seem helpless and incapable of earning a living, 2 to 3 children are necessary. This minimizes the risk of an old age without children or grandchildren, who have to prove by their respect and love their gratitude to her for having been such a good mother and grandmother. Besides, it allows the children to keep each other amused, leaving mother free for superior occupations, sewing, for example, or baking. Her maternal care goes as far as to push them into one room and leave them to it. She will only go back in there again when one of them gets hurt and screams loudly enough to summon her. In addition, the upbringing, training, and manipulation of several children is easier than that of just one child. To instill obedience into just one, she has to think out complex methods to outsmart it, to persuade it, to get it to see reason, or she has to chastise it. Since this is a nuisance, mother usually leaves it to the father. Several children, on the other hand, can be trained by blackmail. As they are all dependent on their mother's approval, she has only to show a very little preference for one, and the others will do exactly what she wants. Every child lives in constant fear that its mother might withdraw her love and give it to someone else. And if this fear does not produce affection between brothers and sisters, as if women would care, at least it increases their competitiveness and performance. Even later, when the children are long since grown up, they will still vie with each other for their mother's respect. The sons satisfy their ambitions in their work, the daughters in their amassing of property. From time to time, they will all gather together and again return to mother. Mother, of course, regards this as a sign of their affection towards her and likes to call the interest her children take in the progress of each other a sense of family. On such occasions, they each give their accounts of their latest acquisitions. But all these advantages only hold good when there are no more than 2 or 3 children. A woman with more than 3, usually because of an oversight on her part or religious beliefs on her husband's, really will have quite a lot to do for a few years, even with the freedom to organize her own timetable and without the responsibility of earning the daily bread. A sense of responsibility as far as the children are concerned is, in any case, alien to woman. The increased activity only lasts until the youngest child reaches nursery school age. There is, however, one further small advantage in having a large family. The husband is unlikely to leave before all the children are grown. A man who leaves his wife with 4 or more children, even if he cannot stand the sight of her a moment longer, is considered almost a criminal in our society. However, by the time the children have started school, most of even a prolific woman's work is done. Once again, she has time and money enough to enjoy herself to a certain extent. She will go to the hairdressers, arrange flowers in vases, paint her furniture according to the latest hints in the illustrated women's magazines, and care for her valuable body. In most Western countries, school lasts all day, and in the few places where it does not, men are busying themselves with their customary vigor to change the system. Their researchers have shown that children who are not exposed to their mothers for half a day develop their mental faculties faster and therefore are capable of greater achievement later on. The practical application of this discovery, which they regard as in no way humiliating, after all they lack man's sense of honor and therefore cannot be offended in this way, is therefore doubly in their own interest. Chapter 18. Women's Vices. A pile of linen, neatly ironed, lies in the linen cupboard. The roast is nicely browned all over. A curl falls in exactly the right place over the forehead. The pink of the nail varnish matches exactly the pink of the lipstick. Washing, clean and fresh, is fluttering in the breeze. 10 pairs of clean shiny shoes stand in a row. The windows are polished till they make the passerby blink. Husband went off to work on time. The children are playing in the sun. Everything is perfect, and woman's world is 100% in order. At such time, their sense of pleasure and happiness reaches its zenith. And just to make sure this exhilaration lasts, a woman will quickly bake another cake, water the rubber plant near the living room window, or get on with knitting a sweater for her youngest child. Those who do not work have very different pleasures from those who do. A woman does not laze around on the couch surrounded by newspapers. Man's idea of idleness is quite different, and that is why she appears so industrious to him. A woman does not want to stay at home just to rest. What has she, after all, to rest from? But she is addicted to pleasures, and she needs time for her pleasures. And what are they? Baking cakes, ironing the clean washing, making clothes, cleaning windows, curling her hair, painting her toenails, and sometimes even, and we will come to this later, doing a little shorthand and typing. And just to make sure that no one recognizes the fact that for her all this is pleasure, she calls these pleasures housework. She is only indulging in orgies of personal hygiene to please her partner. And if one of her silly little pleasures is to sit at a desk in an outer office translating ready-made thoughts, ready-made since they are provided by professional men, into a visual medium, well, let her call it stimulating mental work. In this way, women indulge in a great permanent party and live in a world of freedom and rationalized happiness, far from any responsibility. They occupy a realm man would never dare to dream of. A world he believes to be the domain of hippies, a life to be found perhaps in the carefree South Sea Islands, but never a world so close to home. Of course, there would be nothing to object to in these harmless orgies of pleasure if only men recognized them for what they really are. But it is a pity that they ruin their own lives believing that the woman's lot is worse. It is quite impossible for a man to imagine that this represents happiness to the opposite sex. They would have to realize that it is a woman's nature to be able to enjoy amusements at the lowest and most monotonous level, and such boundless stupidity is beyond male comprehension. Not even psychologists can grasp it, although they spend their lives studying the female mind. Being men, they must find it more interesting than their own. But it would never occur to them for a minute that woman's so-called psyche is unfathomable merely by virtue of lack of intelligence, that feminine work only appears unattractive to the male because he is incapable of imagining the required degree of stupidity necessary to be able to enjoy it. These experts have discovered that almost all girls only do well in school in subjects which do not require thought. These subjects are those which can be learned by heart, like languages, for instance, or mathematics, in which everything follows strict rules. And to have a good memory can, as we know, also be a sign of feeble-mindedness. Subjects such as physics, chemistry, or biology are completely beyond them. But no one ever concludes from this that girls are lacking in intelligence. They assume, instead, that there is a typically feminine sort of intelligence, and psychologists are incapable of grasping that this sort of intelligence is not something inborn, but something acquired from a very young age. The last original thought, on average, a girl child utters will be at about the age of 5. After that, her by now completely imbecile mother takes care to put a brake on any further signs of budding intelligence. Most men will never quite admit the depth of their wives' stupidity. They agree that they are not terribly clever, but grant them intuition or instinct instead. And they like to call this a feminine instinct as opposed to that of an animal. Unfortunately, this famous feminine instinct is really nothing but a euphemism for statistical probability. Women poke their noses into everything and give opinions about everything, and, since they are so stupid, they don't realize that they are making fools of themselves. As a result, according to the law of averages, their forecasts will be correct every now and again. Most of their predictions are negative or vague in any case. Banalities such as, "it can only end in disaster," or "I'd steer clear of that if I were you," or "your so-called friends will only let you down in the end," are meaningless. Anyone will be safe enough making such generalizations. And if, occasionally, women do see more clearly than men, it is only because their feelings, unlike those of men, are never involved. Women's silliness is but the natural result of their attitude to life. By the age of 5, any girl will already have decided that she wants to get married and to have a home and children. And by the time the girls are 10, 15, or 20, they will still want the same things. So if a woman firmly decides, even as a child, to live at a man's expense, what good will intelligence and reasoning be to her? She has to keep her mind free for her future man, otherwise she could not respond to all his inclinations and interests, and even praise him for them. How can she tell, when still young, what type of man she will marry? What use would it be if she opted to become a socialist, demonstrating female students are usually associated with demonstrating male students, when later on she might decide to marry a well-to-do manufacturer? Suppose she became a vegetarian, sensitive being that she is. What happens if she later marries an Australian cattle farmer? What's the use of a woman becoming an atheist when she may spend her life within the rose-covered walls of a vicarage? Would it have helped Jacqueline Bouvier to have developed ideological concepts as an adolescent? A leaning towards democracy would only have helped her first marriage with JFK. For the second, she would have had to have a soft spot for fascism. But since she is one of the most feminine of women, she is probably not interested in men's beliefs anyway. Basically, she is only interested in pleasing and influencing women. In the end, it is probably better if a future lady of society has only a smattering of the arts, of table manners and languages, so that if she is later in the awkward position of having to play a part in public life, as the wife of a man who plays a part in public life, she can easily get out of her dilemma. All she has to affirm is that a real woman's place is in the home, looking after husband and children, and that the world will then accept her attitude as one of remarkable self-effacement and applaud her for it. Women's stupidity is so overwhelming that anyone who comes into contact with it will become, in a way, contaminated by it. That it is not obvious is due solely to the fact that everybody has been exposed to it from birth and has, as a result, become imperceptibly used to it. In previous years, men either ignored this or believed it to be a typically feminine characteristic which bothered no one. But with the increase in leisure and money to spend, women's need for entertainment has grown. Consequently, their imbecility is spreading into public life as well. It is not only reflected in the vases, bedroom pictures, brocade curtains, cocktail parties, and the Sunday sermons. The mass media are more and more involved in it. Women's programs are gaining ground in radio and television, and even respectable newspapers print society gossip, crime features and fashion news, horoscopes and cooking recipes. The output of women's magazines is increasing daily. In fact, imbecility is gradually infiltrating into public life as a whole, instead of being limited to the contamination of the private sphere of men. There are periodicals and books which deal with subjects such as politics, philosophy, science, economics, and psychology. There are also those dealing with fashion, cosmetics, interior decoration, society gossip, cookery, crime, and love affairs. Men read almost exclusively the first kind, women exclusively the second. Both groups consider each other's reading matter to be so repulsive and dreary that they would rather be bored to death than indulge in it. Men are indeed interested in whether there is life on Mars or whose arguments are more valid in the Sino-Soviet frontier dispute, while women are left completely cold by such topics. Women only want to know how to embroider little brown bunny rabbits, how to crochet a dress, or to find out whether a certain film star is getting a divorce or not. So the sexes continue along their neatly separated paths, each with its own horizon, never establishing real contact with the other. There is only one subject which will arouse the interest of both, and that is the subject of women. Naturally, there are some men who are not spared the task of reading special women's publications. Although fashion does not interest most men, it is conceived by male slaves, and yet women have the nerve to say that they bow to the dictates of the great courtier. Men also think up the other media for the female pastimes. In order to be sure such efforts will be a success, they have to lower themselves to women's mental level and to find out what they like. Since this is a near impossible task for men, they rely very often on a staff of female editors. They are quite happy to tell him what a woman likes, but from then on, it is his responsibility. His tasks will be an attractive layout, better distribution, and sales promotion. Magazines serve many purposes in the female world. Some are for entertainment, such as She and Nova. Others satisfy the cravings for gossip, gentle, and movie life. Still others give advice on which mask to choose, Vogue and Queen. There are even magazines which unite the various spheres of interest, such as Elle, Baguette, and Grazia. All these magazines have one thing in common: they ignore men. The subject of men's magazines, on the other hand, is almost exclusively woman. If man is mentioned at all in a woman's publication, it is only to enumerate his supposed preferences in women, home, and food. Wear flesh-colored underwear this summer. Men love it. Natural makeup is preferable for your first date. Use candlelight. It makes him feel romantic. 3 recipes to make him love you, and so on. And because such generalizations of male preferences can only serve the purpose of helping women to catch and hold any given man more easily, they are really no more than recipes. Readers of such advice are either still unmarried and therefore on the lookout for a good worker, or they are married and so are dependent on keeping what they have already conquered in the way of manpower. They are directives telling women how to get the best out of the most reliable robots in the world, for that is how they regard men. It is not uncommon to see an article openly headed something like, How to get your Mr. Right, 10 hints to keep him in a good mood, and advice for the first 3 years of married life. There is nothing oblique about articles of this kind. They are as clear and lucid as if they were tips about buying a car or on how to wash and care for a cashmere sweater. Since the range of subjects likely to interest women is necessarily limited, editors are frequently at loss for copy. As a result, they have to fall back on the so-called male themes, and since men's interests are so wide, there are plenty of them. These have to be carefully trimmed and revamped to suit female readers, and to go through a complicated process of metamorphosis. The main rule for this process is quite simple. Each article must create the impression that it is basically a report about women. For example, an account of the life of a former heavyweight champion must read, "Women were the ruin of me." If a composer is interviewed for an article, he must say at least once that women are his inspiration, that a melody is like a pretty girl, only not quite as beautiful. With skill, even the most unlikely subjects can be camouflaged to appeal to women. One can interest them in the Ministry of Defense, providing one dresses up the report as an account of the minister's family life. It goes without saying that sufficient space must be allowed for pictures of his wife and children. Women will read articles on foreign countries if the passage begins, "I married an Israeli," or a Japanese, Egyptian, or a Chilean, provided she comes from the same background as her female readers. This principle may in fact be applied to any field, and is particularly successful with politics. Political topics can be brought to women's notice only if the impression is being created that they are centered about a woman. The war in Vietnam only held female attention when the press produced the first photos of the legendary Madame Neu. The problem of Northern Irish Catholics has only become topical with women since the advent of Bernadette Devlin. It is quite likely that not even all the articles written about the problems of contemporary Persia and rolled into one could have helped more towards the understanding of this country than the tragedy of Soraya and her inability to have children. The first political action of any man in power should be marriage to a photogenic woman. One can only guess at the advantages there would have been for Israel or India had Golda Meir or Indira Gandhi been beautiful according to the rigid standards of women. Instead of portraits of Grace Kelly or Farah Diba of Persia, their photos would have graced the covers of illustrated magazines. Women would then have read features entitled "The Jewels of Golda Meir" or "Why Indira Gandhi Appeals to Men," and quite incidentally, the other half of the world, i.e. the one that is better off, could be told again and again about the crisis in Israel, or would realize that in India hundreds of thousands of children are starving to death, children who could easily be saved for the sums of money spent by women on nail varnish and nail varnish remover. Chapter 19. The Mask of Femininity. There is virtually no difference between an unmade-up, bald, naked woman and an unmade-up, bald, naked man, apart from the reproductive organs. Any other differences between them are artificially produced. A man becomes a man because he develops his intelligence and through its development his productivity. His appearance changes very little. A woman becomes a woman by means of gradual stultification and by deliberately transforming her external appearance. And this differentiation between the sexes is prompted exclusively by women. As we have said, a man is only considered masculine as a result of a series of manipulations on the part of women. A woman, on the other hand, is the author of her own transformation and produces femininity by means of cosmetics, hairstyles, and clothes. This femininity, synthetic in origin, consists of two different components: emphasis on secondary sexual characteristics and alienation by means of a mask effect. Woman makes use of varying types of masks in order to make a difference between herself and a certain given man as conspicuous as possible. The first component serves to make her desirable to man, the second to make her mysterious to him. She thus forms herself into the equivocal unknown opposite sex, making it easier for him to accept his enslavement. Thanks to the wide range of possible transformations each woman can offer a man, and the proper woman varies her looks just a little every day, she keeps him in a state of constant bewilderment. While he is still trying to find yesterday's woman in today's, she gains time to achieve her own ends. She will maneuver the man into an untenable position, all the time skillfully distracting his attention from the stench of a rotting mind beneath a pleasing mask. Woman regards her natural self merely as the raw material of a woman, and it is not the material but the end result which has to be judged. Unmade up, without their curls and bracelets and necklaces, women are really not yet present. This explains why they do not mind running around in curlers or with gold cream on their faces. It is not them at that stage. They are still occupied with the process of becoming them. They succeed with this sort of make-believe all the more easily because they are not hampered by any kind of intelligence. No effort is so great that women will not make it in order to achieve this metamorphosis. No makeup can cost too much or take too long to put on, when it is a question of the final product which will distinguish them so markedly from men. By rubbing cream into their skins, they make them smoother than men's. Their hair is curled or worn long for the same reason. They do not put black mascara around their eyes for the sake of beauty. It is to make them different from male eyes, strange, mysterious, and disturbing. All this was the original purpose of the female masquerade, but it has almost been forgotten now. In the course of the last few decades, the average middle-class married woman has developed from a rather busy domestic servant into a kind of demi-mondaine, well padded with the comforts provided by men. As a result of this, her former games, which were for the specific purpose of transforming her appearance, have become an end in and of themselves. Since amusing themselves with their own bodies is their favorite game, and well-to-do middle-class wives frequently have nothing else to do, they occupy themselves in this way. What's more, they are encouraged to do this by men. After all, it is men who manufacture their cosmetics, design their fashions and hairstyles, and make a living by doing so. They do their best to provide these women with new variations, helped by the editors of women's magazines and by women's radio programs. In fact, women have almost succeeded in producing a totally new feminine culture, a sort of women's arts and crafts. In this sanctuary, they live among themselves, disturbed by none, being led to heights, or rather into depths, where no man can follow apart from those specialized slave laborers mentioned above. Take care your lips stay smooth, advises, for example, one well-known magazine. This to a woman who complained of badly chapped lips. Brush your lips daily with a wet toothbrush and use a lip salve with regularity. Never use pearl lipsticks. They settle more easily into the cracks. Don't forget to take your measurements, the editor goes on to advise all women. Your pelvic dimensions should never be more than 9 inches larger than your waist, nor should they exceed your bust by more than 3.5 inches. Always brush your eyebrows into a becoming sweep before outlining them in pencil, and never draw them in with one straight arch. Instead, follow each hair with a separate stroke. It will look completely natural if the lines are vertical nearest the bridge of the nose and carefully toned with 2 different colors, for instance gray and brown mixed together. Always keep a mirror in your kitchen. It will help you control your face. You will notice if you frown or pull faces while you are cooking, or if your hair has become messed up. Women are grateful for all these rules in the game. They have not enough imagination to think them out for themselves. They follow them religiously, measuring their pelvic dimensions, brushing their lips, outlining their eyebrows, and hanging up little mirrors in their kitchen to avoid wrinkles caused by thinking. And when they have done all that, there are more fun and games waiting. There are actually women today who bathe their breasts daily in cold water for 10 minutes. It makes them firm, you see. There are women who oil their bodies all over every morning, and not because of medical advice. There are those who twist their hair around 30-odd curls every few days and who spend at least half an hour just on making up their eyes. And as they, thanks to all these efforts which a man feels are totally absurd anyhow, grow stranger, more incalculable, and more feminine as each day goes by, it is often precisely this type of woman who attracts the most willing slaves. In the meantime, the game goes on. Anyone who wants to join the game, to keep up with the coterie, has to observe more and more new rules. For women's demands on each other are enormous. Men have long since dropped out of the game. The opportunities for entertainment offered by one's body have increased enormously, and will go on doing so, though, of course, it is inevitable that many women cannot keep up the pace. These will return to their other source of entertainment, the home. As the amount of money available to women depends on the husband's income, women are divided into classes. There are those who have an excellent mask, those whose mask is good, and those whose masquerade is merely adequate. The first group become the idols of all the others, and, thanks to the constant efforts of their public relations organizations, provide a kind of substitute gratification for them. Even for a woman with an average type of mask, the rules are getting more and more complicated. If she goes swimming, for example, her makeup must be waterproof, her legs and armpits hairless, her body oiled, and her hair completely hidden by a cap covered with rubber flowers. For the supermarket, a matte base with a dab of rouge and light brown mascara is the thing. Funerals require a pale makeup to enhance the effect of her black lace mantilla, and add an almost invisible lipstick. But if she is going to spend a few minutes at a cocktail party, the preparations for dressing and makeup will take hours. There was a time when only one shade of eyeshadow was sufficient. Now it must be 3, white, gold, and green, for example. Her lips must be cared for with salves, lip liners, mother-of-pearl lipsticks, and powder. False eyelashes, no longer stuck on in one strip, must be carefully gummed in position, one by one. That is more natural, as they say. Her own coiffure must be embellished with an additional hairpiece, and both must always be freshly shampooed and curled. For eye makeup alone, the following are basic essentials. False lashes, a special glue, tweezers for putting the lashes in place, mascara, eyeliner, 3 shades of eyeshadow, 2 shades of eyebrow pencil, powder for the brows plus a specially angled brush for application, a small brush for the eyebrows, oil-based pads for removing the makeup, and special cream to soothe the eyes. The men who, of course, adore their goddesses and want them to be divine, oddly enough, ambiguous means to be feminine, have no desire to watch these hours of slavish narcissistic primping and are getting more and more uncomfortable. They will never understand the pleasure a woman takes in housework, and to them the makeup process is just as degrading. Every man knows that he himself could not care less if a woman wears 3 colors of eyeshadow or 1, just as he knows he has no need of lace, curtains, or rubber plants in the living room. But he realizes that other men, or society, demand this of women, and he feels intensely sorry because he believes himself to be responsible for this degrading state of affairs. Since he realizes that he and the other members of his sex are only interested in women's external appearance, for what else is there to interest him, he assumes that his wife's tireless efforts to make herself into an object of desire and to create a certain alienation by means of makeup, which, however, should not be exaggerated, are the signs of an excessive zeal to please him. Of course he feels guilty, and rather touched. Thanks to his primitive needs, he believes he is making woman into the object of his desires. He believes he is suppressing all her worthwhile qualities which are, in fact, nowhere to be found. As usual, he is missing the truth of the matter by a hair's breadth. It is in his own interest to deny the fact that this whole development is tantamount to the highest level of feminine culture, and that women do not, by means of fashion and cosmetics, make themselves into objects, but rather that their ceaseless preoccupation with such matters corresponds to the mental activities of infinitely primitive subjects. And there is something else he doesn't know. A woman does not only recreate herself from day to day, so to speak, alienating herself even from herself again and again, merely for the sake of entertainment. This cult satisfies her very insignificant need for a religion as well, a need which, as we have already seen in the chapter dealing with the pleasures of non-freedom, depends on her low level of intelligence. Every step in the process of this transformation requires a totally neutral critical observation of self. It forces a woman to regard herself constantly with the eyes of a female stranger, and to test the result of her labors in terms of that onlooker's eyes 1,000 times a day. If the transformation is a success in those critical eyes, or even if it surpasses them, he can, still in the eyes of the same stranger, indulge in unrestrained self-admiration. Thanks to this trick, she is, as it were, in a position to worship at her own feet, and is therefore to a large extent exempt from every system which is designed to satisfy a man's pleasure and non-freedom, systems such as ideologies, religions, or glorifications of some other being. Women are so preoccupied with self and with beautification that men have come to the logical conclusion that they themselves could never be considered handsome by women, even if they noticed them. There is an old saying that men do not need to be good looking. Many men will repeat this piece of wisdom. But this is not only true. Even if he wished, women would never find him handsome. How could women who take such pleasure in her own ridiculous masquerade possibly appreciate an unmade-up, conventionally dressed man? What else would they be but first steps, raw material, preliminary sketches for a later stage in human development? In a sense, this implies that all men must be ugly in women's eyes, and this leaves her free to make her choice according to his income and the standard of living he may be able to offer her. Particularly nowadays, sensitive men seem to realize this, and are trying to attract women by raising their own standards to live up to the requirements of women's rules, to meet them on their own ground by wanting to make an impression on them by their outer appearance. In the main, however, these attempts to break away from convention have been doomed to failure. In the first place, men could hardly achieve something overnight which women have been cultivating for centuries. Man's long hair is never as silky, nor his skin as delicate as a woman's. His clothes will never be so exquisitely extravagant. And, in the second place, the vast armies of enslaved men have thrown these deserters out of their ranks, and more or less shut them off from earning a proper living. Today, there are few men who wear a mask. Those who do, poets perhaps and painters, beat musicians, journalists and actors, hippies and photographers, need just this sort of disguise in order to earn their money, rather as a kind of contemporary court jester. Of course, most of these men have a woman about them, someone who will utilize their earnings immediately. A poet has his muse, a painter his model, a beat musician his groupie. All of these women live on their men. Even if men did, as a general rule, take to growing their hair long, or to wearing chains with pendants round their necks, which after all is possible, for every 100 years or so there have been slight changes in men's fashions due to the altered working conditions, their long hair would be cut to a uniform length, and those chains around their necks would become a replacement for ties, and just as discreet and inconspicuous. Chapter 20. Colleagues are easy game. There are many women who take their place in the working world of today. Secretaries and shop assistants, factory workers and stewardesses, not to mention those countless hardy young women who populate the colleges and universities in ever-increasing numbers. One might even get the impression that women's nature had undergone a radical change in the last 20 years. Today's young women appear to be less unfair than their mothers. They seem to have decided, perhaps out of pity for their victims, not to exploit men anymore, but to become, in truth, their partners. The impression is deceptive. The only truly important act in any woman's life is her choice of partner. In any other sphere she can afford to make mistakes, but under no circumstance can she take the risk at this vital moment in her life. Consequently, she will look for a man in those places where he works or studies, and where she can best observe and judge the necessary masculine qualities she values. Offices, factories, colleges, and universities are, to her, nothing but gigantic marriage markets. The particular field chosen by any young woman as a hunting ground will depend to a large extent on the level of income of the man who has previously been her slave, in other words, her father. The daughters of men in the upper income brackets will choose colleges or universities. These offer the best chances of capturing a man who will earn enough to maintain the standard she has already acquired. Besides, a period of study for form's sake is much more convenient than temporary employment. Girls from less well-off homes will have to go into factories or shops, offices or hospitals for a time, but again with the same purpose in mind. None of them intends to stay in these jobs for long. They will continue only until marriage, or, in cases of hardship, till pregnancy. This offers women one important advantage. Any woman who marries nowadays has given up her studies or her job for the sake of the man of her choice, and sacrifices of this nature create obligations. Therefore, if women work or study, it really serves to falsify statistics and furthermore to enslave men more hopelessly than ever, because education and the professions mean something very different when applied to women as opposed to men. When a man works, it is a matter of life and death, and the first working years of his life are decisive. Any man of 25 who is not well on his way up the ladder can be considered, to all intents and purposes, a hopeless case. At this stage, All his faculties are being developed, and the fight with his competitors is a fight to the death. Behind a mask of business friendship, he is constantly on the watch for any sign of superiority in one of his associates, and he will anxiously note its appearance. If this same associate shows sign of weakness or indecision, it must be taken advantage of at once. Yet man is only a tiny cog in a gigantic business machine, himself being effectively exploited at every turn. When he grinds others, he grinds himself most of all. His orders are really orders from above passed on by him. If the men at the top occasionally stoop to praise him, it is not in order to make him happy. It is only to spur him on, to stimulate him to greater effort. For man who was brought up to be proud and honorable, every working day is merely an endless series of humiliations. He enthuses about products which bore him to tears, laughs at jokes which he finds tasteless, and expresses opinions which are not his own. After all, not for a moment is he allowed to forget that the slightest oversight may mean demotion, that one slip of the tongue may spell the end of his career. Yet woman, who is the prime cause of all these struggles and under whose very eyes all these fights take place, just stands aside and watches. Working, to her, means flirting and dates, teasing and banter, with the odd bit of work done for the sake of appearances, work for which, as a rule, she has no responsibility. She knows that she is only marking time, and even if she does have to go on working for one reason or another, at least she has had years of pleasant dreams. She watches men's battles from a safe distance, occasionally applauding one of the contestants, encouraging or scolding. And while she makes their coffee, opens their mail, or listens to their telephone conversations, she is cold-bloodedly making her choice. The moment she has found Mr. Right, she retires gracefully, leaving the field open to her successors. The same applies to university education. American colleges admit more and more women, but the number who actually complete their courses is less than before the Second World War. They sit happily in lectures, designing their spring wardrobes and spending their breaks flirting with the students. With their scarlet nails carefully protected by transparent rubber gloves, they play around with the corpses in the dissecting rooms, unlike their male colleagues whose whole future is at stake. If a woman leaves university with an engagement ring on her finger, she has earned her degree. Man has hardly even begun when he has obtained his diploma. Degrees are, after all, easy to come by. You have only to learn things by heart. How many examiners can tell the difference between the real knowledge and bluff? Man, however, has to understand his subject as well. His later success will depend on whether his knowledge is well-founded. His later prestige will be built on this, and often other people's lives are dependent on it. None of these battles exists for women. If she breaks off her studies and marries a university lecturer, she reaches the same standards without unduly exerting herself. As the wife of a factory owner, she is treated with greater respect than he himself, and no one would dream of treating her at the best as an assembly line worker in the self-same factory. As a woman, she always acquires the prestige and living standards of her husband, but has to do nothing to maintain them. The shortest way to success is marriage to a successful man. She does not win by her own industry, ambition, or perseverance, but simply through her attractive appearance. We've already seen what demands the well-trained man make on woman's appearance. Such beautiful women, however, are usually those who have had an easy life from their childhood days, and as intelligence is only developed in competition, such women never find it necessary to develop their minds. And that is also why most truly successful men usually have the most abysmally stupid wives, unless of course one considers woman's skill at transforming herself into bait for a man a feat of intelligence. It has almost become a commonplace that a really successful man, be he a company director, financier, shipping magnate, or the conductor of an orchestra, will, when he reaches the zenith of his career, marry a photographic model. Usually it will be his second or third marriage. Men who have inherited money often take such a supergirl as their first wife, although she will be exchanged in the course of years for another. Yet, as a rule, models are women of little education who have not even finished school and who have nothing to do until they marry but to look beautiful and pose becomingly in front of a camera. But they are beautiful, and that makes them potentially rich. As soon as such a woman has caught her man, she gives up her career for love, or at least that is what she will tell him. After all, he could hardly be flattered by the thought that she had only been saved in the nick of time for having to sweat her way through examinations. He would much rather get drunk on the idea of a love which knows no compromise, and which this woman pretends to feel for him. Who knows, he thinks, she might have become a famous surgeon, celebrated prima ballerina, brilliant journalist, and she has given up all this for him. He would never believe that she preferred to be the wife of a famous surgeon, to have his income and prestige without having either the work or the responsibility. Therefore, he resolves to make her life by his side as comfortable as possible to compensate for such a great sacrifice. A small percentage, 10 to 20%, of women students in industrial countries of the West do, in fact, obtain their degree before they get married. Despite occasional exceptions, they are, as a rule, less attractive and have failed to catch a suitable provider while still at university. But then, this degree will automatically raise their market value, for there are certain types of men who feel personally flattered if their wife has a degree, providing they have one of them themselves. It only goes to show how clever he himself must be if such a highly educated woman is interested in him. If by chance this mastermind happens to be sexy as well, then the man will be in his seventh heaven. But not for long. Even women doctors, women sociologists, and women lawyers sacrifice their careers for their men, or at least set them aside. They withdraw into suburban villas, have children, plant flower beds, and fill their homes with the usual trash. Within a few years, these new entertainments will obliterate the small amount of expert knowledge, learnt by heart, of course, and then they will be exactly like their neighbors. Chapter 21. The Emancipated Female. The word emancipated there is in quotation marks. There are, however, women who still have jobs or careers at the age of 25 or more. There are a variety of reasons for this. Number 1. The woman is married to a failure. He's not making enough money to provide her with all the useless rubbish she cannot do without. Number 2. The woman cannot have children. Once the man's passion for her has been spent, he can see no good reason for continuing to support her. Number 3. The woman is ugly. Number 4. The woman is emancipated. Number 5. The woman is interested in a particular career. Right from the start, she is prepared to do without personal slave and personal children. Types 1 and 2 have reasons which are obvious. It is the next two groups which are important. For an ugly woman is often considered to be emancipated, and this is a totally false assumption. The chance of meeting someone in the last category, a woman who renounces comfort and serfs for intellectual reasons, let alone from a sense of what is fair, is very rare indeed. Let us consider the ugly woman. A woman is ugly when she is unattractive to men, that is, when her secondary sexual characteristics are underdeveloped or not sufficiently advertised, and because there is a total absence in her features of a baby look. A woman of this type works for the same reason as a man, because there is no one else to do it for her. Yet whereas man keeps a wife and children with his income, she works for herself alone. She would never use the money she has earned to finance the life of a beautiful young man. This type of woman is frequently quite intelligent. True, at the beginning, she will have permitted her intellectual capacities to become atrophied because she, like all other women, has been following her mother's example, and because she too will want to wait for such a working slave. But the older she gets, the more she sees her chances dwindle, and one day she finds herself faced with the fact that there remains nothing else for her to do but to remember and resurrect the last remnants of what was once her mind, and to make the best of it. Some women in this group achieve a very real success. They frequently obtain high honors, simply because they are unusual, a rare species, these more intellectual women, and one often meets them as journalists, authors, politicians, doctors, or lawyers. And what's more, they render a great service to the exploiters in the suburban villas. Look at that, they will say. We could do as well, but we renounce it all for you. The men, warned by these few examples of intelligent womanhood in front of them, are only too glad to remain with their imbeciles, who will tell them that those intellectual blue stockings are ugly, bitter, lacking in charm, and that they are, in fact, unwomanly. And his preference for the lobotomized creature lying in his bed will increase 1,000-fold. After all, if necessary, if he becomes really desperate, he can always find a man to talk to. Not even an ugly woman, despite her success, ever wants to give up her special feminine status entirely. She seems to take it for granted that the world should admire her as a kind of eighth world wonder, a woman who has actually achieved personal success. She will emphasize her femininity in every possible way until it becomes almost obscene. She will appear on television and give interviews to the press whenever possible, her flabby bosom hanging over her large desk, complaining how hard it is for her, as a woman, to maintain her status in a man's world. Be that as it may, she is, compared to the usual female exploiter, comparatively respectable and honest. The fact that this honesty has been forced upon her, and you only have to look at her face to realize why she is so successful, is another matter altogether. There is no virtue in ugliness. Things become rather more complicated when one comes to consider the case of the so-called emancipated woman. The first three categories of women can easily be tempted away from their work by bribery, and this includes the ugly woman before she has become successful. An emancipated woman, though, never works for money. She must by definition have been attractive even as a young girl, and therefore have had slaves with good incomes at hand. Therefore, it is only the beautiful woman who can become emancipated. An ugly woman, like a man, is never in this position. No one has ever attempted to corrupt her. Since she, again like men, has nothing to emancipate herself from, she has no choice but to work anyway. The emancipated woman has all the accessories of the average housewife: a comfortable flat, the necessary status symbols, and children. Seldom more than one or two, though. The difference lies in the fact that her sphere of entertainment is not limited by the home or the masquerades given by her own sex. She entertains herself best by undertaking some inferior form of drudgery where she is surrounded by a fairly large audience. We find her wandering airily along the corridors of publishing houses and newspaper offices. We meet her in the ante-rooms of film producers, television executives, and theatrical managers. She is a production assistant, an interpreter, or you will find her behind the counters of a travel agency. She will be found in a jeweler's, an antique dealer's, or a boutique. Anywhere, in fact, where she can meet rich and interesting people. And her money? That is spent almost entirely on her elaborate masks, which keep her with it and up to date at her place of work. In fact, the emancipated woman is just as stupid as the others, but she does not want people to think so. If she mentions housewives, it is with utter contempt. As she has a job which would not be unworthy of a man, she really believes this very fact alone makes her intelligent, but she is confusing cause and effect. Men only work because they have to, and not because they are intelligent. Most men would only start to make proper use of their intelligence if they were free of financial obligations, as free as housewives, for example. A woman living at home has, in fact, far better opportunities of enjoying a stimulating intellectual life than one who is stuck between typewriter and dictaphone. The work chosen by an emancipated woman rarely involves effort or responsibility, although she makes herself believe it involves both. As far as she is concerned, it is satisfying, stimulating, and keeps her from stagnating. She simply couldn't exist without it. Yet if one gets down to the facts, she is never really dependent on it. Unlike the ugly woman, she could give it up at any time. She never works without life-saving apparatus. The moment there is any sign of difficulty on the horizon, up jumps a man from somewhere in the wings and rushes to her aid. This type of woman finds it unfair that she does not get on as fast as man, but on the other hand, she never allows herself to become part of the murderous rat race. The complaint she utters is always the same. Even as an emancipated woman, one simply is not given the same chances as a man. Instead of making an effort to fight for her chance then and there, she runs off, covered in makeup like a clown and looking like a Christmas tree, to yell for women's rights and women's equality at one of the meetings held by her group. It would never occur to her that she alone, and not man, is the cause of this unequal state of affairs. She, woman, with her total lack of any real interest, her stupidity, her venality, her unreliability, her ridiculous masquerades and her eternal pregnancies, and, above all, because of her merciless manipulation of man. How could she have caused the situation? On the other hand, men may well think that the husbands of emancipated women are lucky. They don't have to bear the responsibilities alone. The contrary is the case. The husbands of so-called emancipated women are usually extremely unhappy. After all, they have had the same basic training as other men, and so they are always trying to keep one step ahead of their wives. A translator's husband will be a writer, a shorthand typist's a departmental manager, a pottery maker's a sculptor, a feature writer's an editor. Therefore, an emancipated woman is far from being a help to her man. She exploits him even more than the others. The higher she rises, the more relentlessly she drives him. Such women, either by chance or because they are attractive enough to be protected by some man, often rise to really important positions. If a man's position is comparatively low, whenever she gets an increase in salary, it will be a traumatic experience for him. Professional recognition will merely put him in a panic. He lives in a constant fear that one day she will overtake him, and on top of it, he suffers agonies of jealousy about the strange men she meets every day. He feels superfluous, and his whole existence seems pointless because she no longer seems to need him. The one true happiness of the slave, the only happiness left to men who are manipulated, is now denied to them. A woman of this type does not even make her children happy. After all, she is only different from other women, not better. She is entertained by her stupid office work more than by her children. But she's not going to give up having them. A woman, she will say, has to experience motherhood, otherwise she will never be fulfilled. In fact, this woman has the best of all worlds. She has it, in fact, both ways. She can't do without her stimulating mental work, and is able to bundle her children off to the nurseries or boarding schools, or leave them in the care of one of the much despised housewives. She does not even take care of the housework single-handed. That is shared by her husband after office hours. He can converse with his wife while waxing the floor, watering the plants and polishing the silver. She can entertain him as he labors with her stimulating chatter. And there is plenty of work to do. After all, he cannot expect her to give up the symbols of women's traditional loot. In order to emphasize her claims to masculine prerogatives, her claim, that is, to the highly paid positions of men and not to the prerogatives of, say, soldiers, emancipated women from time to time organize so-called movements. Such campaigns give her an opportunity to draw the world's attentions to her with a great deal of shouting and noise, to wear badges and dress up in the latest suffragette look, and openly to demonstrate her political views by putting lighted candles in her living room windows. In full view of the television public, women have pinched the bottoms of building site workers and perpetrated other absurdities. Woman frees herself from her imaginary chains at regular intervals. Spiritual ones being an unknown to women, she interprets them literally. At the turn of the century, it was the corset that went. In the 70s, the bra. And just to make sure that everyone knew all about it, she got men to make see-through blouses. Perhaps in the next wave of emancipation, it'll be the uncomfortable long skirt which goes. The skirt they have just flirtatiously readopted and made part of their props, despite general male disapproval. But their stupidity, their inanity, their ridiculous behavior, their mendacity and lack of feeling, and their tedious and abysmally stupid chatter are still there. Women have never taken any steps to get rid of those. No matter how much a woman is earning, she will never let a man take her place in the house, nor will she take on his responsibility for earning their livelihood or maintaining their social prestige. Even though it is quite possible, since she is much more thick-skinned and consequently will suffer much less by doing work of deadly routine, that a job really would fulfill her and make her happy. She will never help him with her money. She will never open doors for him or light his cigarette. She will never take out any insurance policy in his favor or give him alimony should there be a divorce. That is not considered feminine. Neither would it occur to a man to expect such a settlement. He has been conditioned too well. The husband of the emancipated woman will simply give his wife a kiss, wipe the traces of face cream, powder, and lipstick from his face, and throw himself once again into the battle. Chapter 21, the final chapter, which is called What is Love? Man has been manipulated by woman to the point where he cannot live without her and therefore would do anything she asks of him. He fights for his life and calls it love. There are even men who will threaten their idealized female with suicide unless she accepts him. Not that this is much of a risk for them. They have nothing to lose. Woman, nevertheless, is equally incapable of living without man. Like a queen bee, she is incapable of survival on her own. She too is fighting for her life, and she too calls it love. They each need one another, in fact, and it seems therefore that they have at least one kind of feeling in common. The cause, nature, and consequences of this feeling, however, differ as much as do the sexes. To a woman, love means power. To a man, enslavement. Love provides woman with an excuse for financial exploitation, man with an emotionally charged alibi. For the sake of love, woman will do things which are of advantage only to herself, while man does only those things which harm him. If a woman marries, she will give up work for the sake of love. A man will have to work for two for the sake of love. For both sexes, love is a fight for survival. But one survives only by being victorious, the other only by being defeated. It is a paradox that women can also make their greatest gains during moments of utter passivity, and that the word love endows them with an aura of unselfishness even during the moment of their most pitiless deception of man. As a result of love, man is able to hide his cowardly self-deception behind a smokescreen of sentiment. He is able to make himself believe that his senseless enslavement to woman and her hostages is more than an act of honor, that it has a higher purpose. He is entirely happy in his role, and as a slave, he has arrived at the goal he has so long desired. Since woman gains nothing but one advantage after another from the situation as it now stands, things will never change. The system forces her to be corrupt, but no one is going to worry about that. Since one can expect nothing from a woman but love, it will remain the currency for any need she might have. Man, her slave, will continue to use his energies only according to his conditioning and never to his own advantage. He will accomplish still greater feats, while women will become further and further removed from him. The more he tries to ingratiate himself with her, the more demanding she will become. The more he desires her, the less she will find him desirable. The more comforts he provides for her, the more indolent, stupid, and inhuman she will become. And he will find himself lonelier still in the process. Only woman can break the vicious circle of a man's manipulation and exploitation, but she will not do it. There is absolutely no rational reason why she should. It is useless to appeal to her feelings, for she is callous and knows no pity. And so, the world will go on, sinking deeper and deeper into the morass of trash, barbarism, and inanity called femininity. And man, that wonderful dreamer, will never awaken from his dream.